Hello everyone. Crikey, I can hardly believe that I'm here myself. This is Henry Hyde. I'm a Patreon creative. Many of you will remember me as the editor of Battle Games and miniature war games with Battle Games. And I'm here on behalf of Henry Hyde. I'm a Patreon creative. Many of you will remember me as the editor of Battle Games off because there's a delay between me talking. I'm here on behalf of Henry Hyde. Something I've just discovered. Patreon creative. Many of you will remember me as the editor of Battle Games. Basically, trying to delay set this up today. This is the first time I've ever used I'm here on behalf of Henry Hyde. Something I've just discovered. Patreon creative. Many of you will remember me as the behind the scenes basically trying to delay set this up today. First time hello David here on behalf of joining me. Something I've just discovered. Patreon creative. Many of you gentlemen behind the scenes basically trying to delay set this up today. First time hello David here on behalf of joining me. Something I've just discovered. Patreon creative comment section behind the scenes basically trying to delay set this up today. Hello David here on behalf of joining me. Something I've just discovered. Creative comment section behind the scenes basically trying to delay set this up today. Hello David here on behalf of joining me. Something I've just discovered. Creative comment section. Yes, okay, let's mute that. Is that better, David? Is that better? Can you hear me? That looks like a thumbs up. Is that an improvement? Okay, it looks like I might have had the system audio on as well as my Yeti. Oh, keeps restarting what you're saying. Right, that's better. Yes. Okay, thank you. Well, thanks for pointing that out, David, or I might have wittered on for ages without knowing what was going on at your end. Not a problem. Okay, yes. It's all being done on a wing and a prayer, because here I am, ladies and gentlemen, as I say, I'm sitting in front of my Apple Mac up in the Lawford on Sunday afternoon. Yes, David, I can imagine hearing multiples of me was surreal. This isn't meant to be a science fiction presentation. Anyway, allow me to continue. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I am going to have a nice sip of drink there. That'll do me fine. Right, let's get that out of the way. Right. What am I talking about today? Well, I had Lawrence on my podcast, my Battle Chat podcast, the other day, and we talked about the fact that one of his favourite things that had been put on at the show was, in fact, it was two favourite things, was when we put on Sittangbad from Charge. And then the subsequent year, so that was 2006, and then the subsequent year we put on Mollwitz from the Wargame. And they certainly are unusual as choices for games, because, of course, certainly at the time, everyone associated the Partizan, and I ought to say the other Partizan, because I think one of the games we put on was actually at the other Partizan. But they were unusual because, of course, Partizan has this reputation for highly realistic, highly detailed games, very elaborate scenery, some extraordinary, work that goes into painting and making terrain for games that are staged at Partizan. But at the time, I just, in 2006, earlier in 2006, I just launched a magazine called Battle Games that had a bunch of Spencer Smith miniatures and my mate Guy holding a bounce stick on the front cover. Some of you may well remember that. And in fact, I've got my old folder of Battle Games magazines under the desk here. I brandished that at you. Some of you may remember, that front cover. There we are. and it was "Hold on to your bounce sticks, big battalions are back." That was the headline. Wow, that caused a stir, but it was in response to the fact that around about that time there was the growth in the old school wargaming group that had been started on Yahoo, and a number of us got together, and it was just to kind of remember the fact that there were these great wargamers, and what happened to them? What happened to the Donald Featherstones, the Charles Grants? I mean, sadly, obviously, Brigadier Peter Young had already died at that point, but we just felt there was. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was always also a sense that, what these guys had contributed to the hobby was extensive and highly valid, right? It was certainly of a different time, because of course the kind of stuff that was available to wargamers back in the late 50s through the 60s and into the early 70s, what was available to wargamers then was minimal compared to what we have access to now. I mean, crikey, to say we're living in a golden age is an understatement, isn't it? But it would also be foolish to think that just because these people had plain green tables and relatively simply painted miniatures, that somehow they were stupid or idiots, right? Because they certainly weren't. Brigadier Peter Young, with his friend Lieutenant Colonel J.P. Lawford, who wrote Charge, well, he'd been a brigadier, a highly decorated commando, leader of commandos in the Second World War. I think he got, wasn't it an MC and bar, plus other, awards as well. So he was someone to be reckoned with, that's for sure. Charles Grant had served in the RAF in the Second World War and had come out and was a senior detective. So again, the man's not an idiot, and both of them could write. They had very distinctive styles. Charge, if ever you manage to get hold of a copy of Charge, and I do recommend it, I have somewhere put down. Here we are. Here's my copy of Charge. That's kind of one of the original versions. It was reprinted in paperback, I seem to recall, some years afterwards, but the original was Morgan Grampian, London, 1967. If you manage to get hold of a copy of the original, particularly a first edition, it's a lovely thing, full of photographs. Of course, yes, in those days the only colour photograph you get is on the front cover, which is one of the interesting things about that time. But the rules themselves are extremely comprehensive. The Brigadier was a stickler for detail, and some of you I know enthusiasts who've probably got hold of copies yourself. He was, my goodness me, here we are, extremely precise about what formations should be adopted by troops in line and column, and even having a key as to where the commanding officer, the ensign, the regimental sergeant major, all the way down to the Viviandaire and pack animal, where they should be positioned, whether in line or in column. This was one of the revelations, because I think when we first thought about putting on a game, we thought, oh, Charge, they're nice. Oh, hi Nick, nice to see you here. Charge, nice simple rules, old-fashioned. I tell you what, get hold of a copy and read them. They are comprehensive and very precise. So that was a surprise. When it comes to the war game, again, Charles Grant, what a fabulous bloke. And again, he was a man who worked things out. One of the lovely things, and I know that Nick agrees with me on this, one of the lovely things about the war game is that Charles was quite didactic. He wanted to educate the reader as to how he'd arrived at the conclusions he'd arrived at. So he did things like, well, I'm going out with my son onto Dover seafront, and we are going to, time me for a minute. How far can I march in a minute? And how far can I march if I'm going uphill? And he's to work out the fact that heavy cavalry at the walk, it's not fast, is it? David's telling me he got $7.30 off eBay. That's a bargain. Yes, he would walk alongside the household cavalry when it was the Queen's birthday, and they were trotting up the Mall, and he contacted the Royal Horse Artillery about what kind of turning circle a gun and team should have. Let me just take these off because I'm getting a hot neck and I don't need them. So these people weren't stupid, and their contribution to the hobby was enormous. And a lot of us just felt that at the time, this early 2005, 6, that sort of time, it's almost like they just dropped off the edge of the planet. Certainly after Practical Wargamer died a death, sadly, Practical Wargamer magazine. What happened to these people? And certainly my feeling was, wow, these are the doyens of the hobby. Their voice should still be heard in some form or another. So anyway, one of the things that happened, because of the old school wargaming group, was that there was a lot of chat about the games, and oh yes, we love the wargame, we love Charge, we love the Spencer Smiths, we love the Holger Ericssons, we love the Staddens and the Sirens, all these beautiful figure manufacturers from that time. Wouldn't it be nice to put on a game? And any of you out there who've ever put on a game, you know what it's like. And there's a huge number of people who say, oh yes, we ought to do this, we ought to do that, and it comes down to a very tiny number of people, a handful of people, who say, well, do you know what, we're fed up with just talking about it, we're actually going to do something about it, we're actually going to put on a game. And that's how our little conglomeration that we publicised as the Wargamers, and I'll show you the logos and stuff I came up with shortly. Hello John, thanks for joining us. I'd lost my track there with someone joining. Yes, we decided to put together this little group called the Wargamers that consisted of myself and Phil Ollie, and I've lost my pictures, haven't I? What's happened to my pictures? I've gone and jogged something. That's the war game. And where did I put the Charge cover? That's there. There we are. We're back. I have to be careful. Like I say, folks, it's the first time I've used this software, so if I jog something, I do apologise. Yes, as Nick said there, they're part of the DNA of wargaming. Absolutely, the hobby's built on their shoulders and others. Featherstone. My old school wargaming bookshelf is right here. Okay, so there's the Terry Wises of this world. There's the CF Wesencrafts and many others, whose contribution shouldn't be forgotten. So a small group of us: me, Phil Ollie, Steve Gill, and John Priest. Now, Steve was kind of involved with helping me get the idea, turning the idea of battle games as a thing into reality. John Priest, he wrote a column for me in Battle Games for a short while. Lovely chap. Lives up in North Wales, or did. I think he's moved now. He's down in Somerset. But we were kind of chums on the old school wargaming group, and we realised, well, why don't we have a chat and think about this? So we all met up at one of the Partizans. It might have been the other Partisan 2005, and had a chat and decided, well, what should we do? Well, and then we thought, well, there's this ideal candidate to start with from Charge, which is the Battle of Sittangbad. Okay, and you can see here on screen that I've got that section scanned in. So here we go. We've got background to the game. We've got the starting conditions. We've got the Electoral Army here and the Imperial forces, and then a description of the battle. And this is This is a sign of the times. People don't write like this anymore, do they? The battle. The amorous elector, Petrus I, had kidnapped the fair Princess Catherine of Hesse-Darmstadt, infuriating the prince of that state and alarming neighbouring princes with marriageable daughters. The emperor thought the moment propitious to settle accounts with the arrogant and overbearing Petrus, and dispatched an army under the Archduke Guitar to seize and sack the electoral capital. This is fabulous, isn't it? Oh, hi there, pair. This is fabulous, isn't it? Now, the thing is, what's interesting, this kind of tone of writing, style of writing, it's not a million miles away from the kind of thing that my colleague Nick Skinner there and his chum Richard Clark do for their, sharp practice and that kind of game. Right? It's a bit cheeky, a bit tongue-in-cheek. We mustn't forget that Brigadier Peter Young was larger than life, to say the least. He was a huge character, and the writing style in the book reflects the fact that he was, and on it goes, the wretched Archduke was left on his own to make his way as best as he could to the comparative safety of the west bank of the Weser. The Emperor, rudely made aware that noble blood formed no substitute for skill at arms, hastily dispatched General Lentulus to take command, and recalled Guitar, an order that the latter received with unconcealed joy. Marvellous stuff. And I'll just sort of quickly click through the different pages. The first thing is, and the most important thing that's relevant to what we ended up doing, was there's the map. Now, it's quite a vague map. Knowing the size of wargames tables that were popular or appeared to be popular, certainly in the books that were published at the time, it's entirely possible that this was based on something like a table tennis table, because certainly Charles Grant's wargames table, 9 feet by 7 feet, I've read it was an old table tennis table that they just gave a fresh coat of green paint to. But here you can see the marvellous layout. From the one side you've got the Eisenberg Hill, the Eisenwald, Eisenberg village. Here's Kleist and his troops assembled, the Lanciers de Saxe, the Kornberg cuirassiers, the Isenberg regiment. There's the Sittangbad, the woods, another hill and a big marsh, and then down the bottom here the town of Sittangbad, with various troops arranged within and around it. And the thing is, that the aim of, let's have a look here. The aim of the Imperial forces is to prevent the Electoral Army from seizing the east end of the Sittangbad bridge before the 16th move. Now, that's revealing in itself, isn't it? By the end of the 16th move, so many games these days, if you manage to get half a dozen moves done, you consider, oh, we had a good game. We managed to get through, 6 turns per side. Whereas back in those days, they had more leisure time. They would quite have, should we limit it to 16 moves? And I'm sure most of us can remember those lovely days when we would happily play a couple of dozen moves over an entire weekend of huge battles. I kind of miss those times. But anyway, there's the battlefield again. That was the objective. And so the account in the book carries on. Now there, the first picture in the book, you can see, ladies and gentlemen, that by modern standards, that is not a highly detailed piece of terrain. Indeed, you can see that the river here, with the pontoon bridge being built across it, that's been chalked in, as has the marshland. The hills were, thin, looked like might even be polystyrene contour hills. The woods, likewise, some sort of triangle trees and some twigs and goodness knows what. The buildings, relatively nice, probably, model railway built buildings, that kind of stuff. Triang was the brand, as I mentioned before, some of them homemade, but certainly not the kind of standard of game that you think that, we'll do that at Partisan. Now, I think even amongst the four of us who were fans of, old school which we then, following Phil Olley's suggestion, preferred to call classic wargaming. Really, even we thought, no, we can't do that at Partizan. we'll just be laughed out of the hall. Kelham Hall, of course, as it was. So we made our own decisions, as you'll see shortly, about the kind of aesthetic that we wanted to achieve with our games. But it's worth looking back at the original in the book and seeing that, wow, yeah, that was really simple terrain. Interestingly, though, as you can see, if I hold up the front cover again, you can see that the Brigadier wouldn't put up with that sort of level of slapdashness on his miniatures. No, these were probably they were Staden and Siren miniatures, and he commissioned someone to paint them to the most exquisite standard. So you do get this kind of bit of a mismatch between the look of the figures, which were very beautifully painted, albeit individually based, because this is before the days when multiple basing was commonplace, and the very, very simple terrain. Anyway, so I'm going to just take you quickly through these pages from Charge, showing you the development of the battle. And even in black and white, it has to be said, there's something very, very appealing about this, isn't there? The I think the sheer volume of troops, all those cavalry, lots of heavy cavalry smashing into one another. There's something rather lovely. And the description as well, the kind of description, as the cavalry melee swayed to and fro, the 3 companies of Imperial Light Infantry pulled out of Eisenberg village. An unlucky salvo from the electoral guns caught the rear company as they were bunched in the village street, and nearly a third were laid low. But, except for that unfortunate incident, the light infantry disengaged without difficulty. It's just lovely to read this stuff. Here we are, another picture. In the centre, the cuirassiers are charging the electoral skirmishing line, and so on and so forth. There's something very, very charming about this, and you can understand how, as young lads, many of us imprinted on this thing. There's a big fight over a redoubt here. In this picture, oh, look at that! Look at that! Some of it looks like it was probably made out of egg cartons, but what fun! What fun! It's just delightful. One of the things that's very noticeable in the games of this era, certainly in Charge and also to an extent in the war game, that number of officer and commander figures with aides de camp and that kind of stuff that they had in their games, filling up the rear areas behind the fighting, which would seem unusual these days. Yes, we have a few command vignettes and that kind of stuff, but it's very noticeable. They have a lot of very beautiful officer and ADC figures galloping around, partly because in those days, of course, one of the things they often did was in the orders, they would actually to send to send an order to someone, you would literally have to time how long it would take for that figure to move from one point to the other, so from the commander-in-chief to the unit in question. Okay, here we are getting towards the climax of the battle here. The Pandora Regiment with 2 companies of the Isenberg counterattacking the Air Prince's regiment. Hello, Ian Macmillan, welcome. When you say I'm speaking in tongues again, does that mean that the sound has gone funny? I hope not. Please let me know if it has. This is live. There's not much I can do about it. A lovely page with images from Sittangbad. And here we are. The Imperial forces retreat, covered by the Grenadier companies and B battery on the far side of the river. This is such a classic scenario, isn't it? Extracting a force across a bridge whilst trying to prevent the enemy from attacking and getting hold of the bridge. Very tricky, a true tactical challenge, that's for sure. And there we are. Here's the last page describing the battle. Here we go. The sun was very low on the horizon and the light was beginning to fade. Lentulus recognised that the last phase had begun. He confided command of the rearguard to Brigadier Lord Hindford, an English volunteer, and with mingled feelings of surprise and relief, led his glittering staff across the bridge, and so on. So, it's a classic battle. A classic scenario from a classic book. And this is what we tried to tackle. Oh, thank you, Nick. You sound superb. Bless you. I love you too. Right. I'm giving away too much there. So let me, for the moment, close up the Sittangbad pictures from the original book. And there's the front cover of Charge, which I'll close as well. Have a last lingering look at that, folks. It's a lovely thing, and certainly indicative of gaming in a particular age, and it also has to be set in a particular age amongst a particular class of wargamers who could afford what were at the time extremely expensive figures, probably purchased from tradition of London. Right, let me close that down and that one too, because I'm going to now head over and show you some other material. So what I need to do is, let me go to over here. Right, so now I've got to go into my software and tell it to focus on something else. Now it's going to focus on this. Okay, right, I've headed over now. I was showing you stuff in Photoshop, and I'm now showing you stuff from Adobe Acrobat, because this is some of the materials I produced for our game, and there you can see the header boards that I produced. You know, you just saw the cover of the war game, and I managed to find the same typeface, which is actually called Egiziano. Egiziano, Egiziano, and it was wonderful to be able to find this typeface that obviously the last time it had been seen was probably in the 1970s. So I created, I'm a graphic designer, I created some branding for us, the Wargamers, and that was the Battle of Sittangbad. So that was the header board. Here are the badges I created. Oh yes. For myself, John Priest, Steve Gill and Phil Ollie, the participants. And so we had those. I think I've still got one somewhere. I didn't have time to dig it out. But little badges for our chest, to show that we were all on the same team. Didn't get around to doing T-shirts. I think we resisted the urge to do T-shirts. I think that would have been a bit outre for old school wargamers. Then we've got the flyer that I produced for the game. What I'm going to do is things that I think are going to be useful, like this. I'm actually going to upload them to the Battle Games website, and I'll put a link to it somewhere on Twitter, Facebook, under the video here, that once it's finished uploading on YouTube, so you can go and download these bits and pieces if you like and have a read through them, rather than me sit here and read them all out, because I'm not sure how long this is going to take. I thought, maybe an hour, but then I know me, I can talk non-stop for 4 hours. But I'm hoping somewhere in an hour and a half. We'll see how we go. If you all start slipping away, disappearing and saying, you're boring me, Henry, then, I'll get the message. But hopefully I'll be able to show you something about both games, Sittangbad and Mollwitz, in the space of, 60 to 90 minutes, something like that. So this stuff, rather than going through it all in intimate detail, I'll upload them as PDFs. You can probably hear my cat shouting at me, Chuffy, you come in here. Come on. Sorry, folks. Pets interruptions. It's live. What can I say? So that was the flyer I did to hand out to the punters at the show. And this is kind of one of the fun things, the list of forces that we decided on. So, and also noted who actually raised those particular troops. I didn't raise a huge number because I was kind of in charge of the graphic side of things, as you can see. but it was... Oh, hi, Lawrence, and thank you. It was... quite an effort. This is the first time I'd put on a demo game at a war game show, and certainly, the pressure. Hey, this isn't just any show. This is Partizan. We've got to do this right. So we had the Herzog Johann regiment done by Phil, the Ulan regiment by Steve, the Dragoons of Montmort by Phil, the Gendarmerie by John Priest, the Gardejäger by Steve, the Erbprinz regiment, which is just that beautiful, Grenadier regiment. That was John Priest. John Priest, to this day, he's got remarkable painting skills with enamels. He still hoards Humbrol enamels and that kind of stuff, and he does an amazing job. He's perfected his technique, and it was perfect for this sort of setup. The Steinzeit regiment, that was Phil. The Electoral Foot Guards was Steve. The Combined Battalion of Gentlemen Pensioners, that was John Priest. Light Battalion, John Priest. The Engineer Battalion, Steve. And 3 batteries of artillery. Not just 1, not just 2, but 3 batteries of artillery from John Priest. So that was the electoral forces. Over on the Imperial side, that's where I got involved. So Lentulus and his ADC, that was Phil. The Lanciers de Saxe, now that's a famous name, and of course they crop up because they were mates. Charles Grant and Brigadier Peter Young, they were chums and often played at each other's houses. And so you'll see regiments that appear in charge also appear in the war game. Interesting. So the Lanciers de Saxe, Phil. I did Kornberg's Cuirassiere, and I did the Kleist Freikorps light infantry, and I did the Isenburg regiment. That was me. Actually, the Isenburg regiment, that was a bit of a chiz, because really I painted Regiment von Eintopf, and they just served as the Isenburg regiment for this game. Then the Waldeck regiment, that was Phil. The Pandur regiment, Phil. I did some field artillery and then some engineers as well. And you can see our names for the units on the right hand side because we were using them in our own imaginations games as well. So you can see that, yes, on the right hand side, the Chevalier de Rouen, the von Klinkertür Cuirassier, and so on and so forth. Again, I'll post this up so you can have a look at it, but I thought it'd be nice to just kind of run through that to help set the scene. And after the event, I did a report in Battle Games, but I think first of all, before we go there, what I'm going to do, that's the War Games rules. Let's pop that out of the way for the minute. What I'm going to do is switch back to Photoshop so that, come back, I can open up some of the photographs that we took of the Sittangbad game. Now let's have a look. Now first of all, I thought you might find it interesting. Some of you who've painted Spencer Smith yourself know what this job was like, but here in this screen here, they're quite small. I might see if I can enlarge them slightly. This is what my Spencer Smiths looked like before the Sittangbad game. I'm just going to quickly click through some of these because the last time I'd used my Spencer Smiths before this, I was using the WRG 1685 to 1845 rules, which uses very small units. I mean, it's like you can see here, pretty flags. I was pleased with the flags, hand painted on tin foil, not bad for the time, in enamels. You can see that they were quite small units, whereas for Sittangbad, for the charge rules, the units are enormous. It's like 60 figures plus officers, right? So all these figures that you can see here, all these plastic Spencer Smiths, not the minifigs at the front, ignore those, all these little units ended up going in a jar of turps, a big jar of turps, to have the enamel stripped off them and be taken back to the original plastic so that I could paint them up. God, this is bringing back almost painful memories. Anyone who's ever repainted an entire army knows the agony that that comes to. I thought I've got some pictures here. Let me open this lot up. Open, yes, I am sure I want to open 51 items because I'm going to go through them quite quickly, and hopefully momentarily they will appear in Photoshop. It's groaning a bit. Come on, people. Sorry about the delay. Technology. Hello, Skeptical Crypto as well. Hello, Brian. We're all podcast listeners. We could listen to you ramble on for hours. Well, bless your heart, Brian. Yeah, well. All right. Make sure you're comfortable. Make sure you've got a drink. Talking of having a drink. Now, actually, the picture that's come up first, of course, is the picture that I want to come out last. So let me tile all. Crikey! What's the best way for me to have them all floating somewhere? Tile all. Consolidate order tabs. All right, let's just 6 up. This was the painting process. You know, a lot of people say, how do you paint all those Spencer Smiths, Henry? The answer is slowly and in stages. I could have made my life so much easier for myself, but I decided to do sort of a blooming Kevin Dallimore thing. Paintings. It's mad. It is just mad. Oh yes, and Ian's just pointed out. Just check my copy of Charge, first edition, 55 shillings. That was indeed serious money in 1967. God, yes, that really was. That was a week's wages or something, nearly. You know, some people that would be nearly a week's wages back then. So that was an expensive book, probably the equivalent of 60 quid nowadays. I don't know. Somewhere online, I know there's an inflation calculator. What I'm going to do is float all in Windows and see what happens there. So it seems to have taken me. There we go. So hopefully I can go back to the beginning of something. I seem to have... Right, aha! This was the first stage. Can you see this? Right, I'll enlarge it. Spencer Smith's plastic. The original plastic. So these miniatures are mine. Certainly dated back to the 1970s. I still have lots of them. But one of the things you have to do is... to say that the castings were approximate is probably being kind. This sort of brown... bendy-ish plastic with the mold lines were terrible. So there was the first job was scalpel job to get off mold lines. You didn't have to worry too much, if you nicked it here and there, because there was no detail to be lost, right? But there we go. That was absolute stage one, getting them cleaned up, and then the first thing I did after that was give them a coat of diluted PVA. Right, just to give them a seal, because trying to undercoat straight onto that plastic is horrible. So I gave them a coat of diluted PVA. And here's the bottle of PVA, you can see. Okay. Then also down in the bottom left-hand corner here, I don't know if you can see, there's that pile of just behind where my image is. So hang on, just there. Is that making sense? Just there. What are those pale coloured ones? They are also Spencer Smiths, but they're in a harder plastic. They're connoisseur range, as they were called. And they were actually sculpted not by Holger Eriksson, who was the sculptor of the standard Spencer Smiths, but by a chap called Barry Mino. And very beautiful figures they were. Yes, absolutely. I don't know if I move myself. There we go. I've moved myself to reveal underneath. There you go. Those other figures that you can see are much more sort of elegant and actually highly collectible amongst those that know. But anyway, so that was the starting point. Okay, and I go through these fairly quickly. Then we have the next stage showing you closer up what they look like just after be giving that PVA primer. Then the black undercoat, right? Which probably was making a rod for my own back, but that was them after a spray black undercoat as the first stage. And whoops, jumped too far. Is that another picture of them after the black undercoat? Don't need to see that twice, or 3 times indeed. Let's get rid of that one. So one of the things you can see is there's a glimpse of my Wars of the Valentinian Succession campaign diary and some little drawings I did. There's Regiment von Eintopf, and I think that's Regiment von Renscher. Back view there. Love campaign diaries. People like Sydney Roundwood and I have yacked on my podcast about keeping campaign journals, that kind of stuff, full of this kind of stuff. Particularly if it's an imagination and you're inventing stuff as you go along, well, you need to invent your own reference material. And so the uniform of Regiment von Eintopf was one of those things. So there it is next to the unit. Then, here we go. So I was probably using... I might have been using Games Workshop paints. I can't remember what the colours. It's like a dark flesh colour. Was it called dark flesh? Some of you who paint, thank you, David. It's practice is all. But yes, a very rough dark flesh colour to start with, just sploshed on, the hands and faces. Then you add, so that might have been what was next? A dwarf flesh or something? Looks a bit paler than that. Maybe an elf flesh colour. Leaving the dark... I'm pointing at the screen. You can't see what I'm pointing at. But with my cursor, if my cursor catches up with me, hopefully you'll see that I've left just little spaces for the eyes. So it's just a hint that there's some sort of eye there and a bit of a dark bit under their noses. When you can see there's no detail on the faces to actually paint, so we're working in an impressionistic method here. So then let's bring up the next one. Yes, lots of looking along the line to show you that there's lots of them and a bit of focus play. Yeah. Right, and I used a flash in this one. That's a bit bright, isn't it? But you can see there that the highlights really do catch the light. And you can also, because of the flash, it has shown up. If you can see my cursor down here round about their legs, you can see there are indications of gaiters and so forth. One of the things that I ought to mention, of course, that these Spencer Smith miniatures were not sold as 7 Years' War miniatures or Wars of the Austrian Succession miniatures. They were sold as American War of Independence miniatures. The idea being you could use them both for Continental Army, the American Army, or the British Army. And many war games did, I'm sure. Now let's have a look. Here we are from the other side now. And you can see a few grenadiers happening in the foreground. Might be a next stage. Maybe I've added another highlight. Hard to tell. There's Spencer Smith. I have to laugh. Here we are. Grenadiers. Look, they look hideous, really, if you look at them this close up. But what I love about Spencer Smiths, and what I think a lot of people who play with them love about them, is there's a certain style. The human proportions are really good. And from a distance, they look great en masse. This is a classic. Pete Berry, with his 6mm figures, says, don't paint the man, paint the unit. And the same is true of Spencer Smith's. Absolutely the case. A front view here. Yeah, look. Ghastly, really, when you get this close. Aren't they horrid? But you can see I've just left this kind of almost a mask-like In fact, at the time, there was a discussion on the old school wargaming group talking about kabuki style painting. Well, this is kabuki style painting because with Spencer Smiths, you don't really have much of an option. So now, oh look, now we're starting to get somewhere. So I went from black, and then you can see along here, to grey, like a fortress grey on the GW thing, and over the grey then I applied white, and you can see at the back there the musician and officer figures. I've decided to give myself a bit of a break from just doing masses of all the same. I've raced ahead with some of the more interesting figures, but this is a really good shot actually because it shows you like kind of figures over there on the right with lots of black still left, in the middle there lots of them with grey underneath the white, and you can also see just about on these guys in the middle I'm leaving a little gap between the grey and the neighbouring parts. So rather than going along and doing black lining afterwards, I'm leaving a little shadow gap between areas of the figure. So there's the grey, and then the next thing I obviously did was I did all the cross belts, all the white cross belts, and then you can see here I've left a gap showing both a tiny bit of black and a tiny bit of grey. Wow, I really made this hard for myself, didn't I? Yes, Brian, absolutely, the 3-foot rule. I think I went a bit bonkers on these. Anyway, that's at the next stage, and I think we're going to see some more of this in close-up. Yes, here we go. That's the painting technique. So here you've got the black, the grey and the white, and then there's the gap left for the cross belts. Okay, let's head on a bit further. Now this is just me, obviously me working on this, and all of us at our various homes were doing likewise. There was Phil beavering away, there was John beavering away, there was Steve beavering away, and all of us were producing these monstrous regiments. These are all the musketeers with the grenadiers behind. I obviously decided to push ahead with the grenadiers to make life more interesting. Let's have a look here. Close-up of grenadiers being painted. You know, you can't be precise in your painting of a Spencer Smith, so yes, it's a bit splodgy and a bit slapdash in places, but I was also conscious that, I can't remember, there wasn't much time left between this photograph being taken and the actual show where they had to be used, so I was painting pretty quickly and well into the night, that's for sure. As were the guys. Here we are. But it's gradually, I like this sequence. It's kind of, you know, shows you the progress bit by bit as them gradually sort of coming to life. They're starting to look quite smart. The crossbelts have been given an extra coat of white to make them distinct from the coats. Okay, what else have we got? Oh, there's a view from the other end. Oh, we love these long views along the line, don't you? There we are, just one from the other end. What's this next one? Oh, a close-up. Yes, here you can see that extra coat that's been put on the crossbelts. Look awful at this stage. And of course, the other thing that the camera's merciless at is, look at this. Is that a cat hair or one of my hairs that's stuck to one of these guys? Yeah, the camera's merciless, absolutely merciless. The number of times when I was editing the magazine and people said, oh yes, I've spent the day and got some lovely photos for you. And they're, you know, beautiful, crisp, well-lit photos that showed every bit of dust and hair and, you know, imperfection, and would actually result in quite a lot of editorial work in Photoshop to get rid of it. There you are. The camera is a nasty thing. Here we are, we've got a bit more further ahead, waistcoats and gaiters. You can see the gaiters starting to happen. They've been undercoated in grey now. And what else? Oh yes, lots of them now. Look at these, all the grey gaiters. So that was the next stage. And we're getting there, we're getting there. Here we go, we're getting close. And oh, I've got lots of pictures of these. Looking very smart, spanking in their gaiters, the grenadiers. How many images have I got? I think I've got more images than I thought. So I'm going to kind of just very quickly flick through these a bit like a slideshow, guys. Is that all right? Okay, yeah. But what I like is, yes, this brings back memories of the process and a bit of nostalgia about it. It's like, God, I haven't painted anything like this in a while. I've still got thousands of Spencer Smiths to paint. Maybe I'll look. That's a nice shot there. So the gaiters are now white, and you can see I've just put a seam line down the side. Muskets are still black, of course, and undercoated, but it's starting to happen, you know. And if you were painting French troops, you probably wouldn't have as far to go. But I obviously raced ahead and painted a sample Grenadier. Look at him. Ta-da! Nice little mustache there. Yep. This is something you have to do, isn't it? It's one of those things, always, you know, side view. When you're doing a big painting project, sometimes it's worthwhile just cracking out a few individuals just to give you hope of what they're going to look like at the end. Of course, the big Busby bag on top as well. Yeah, individually, you know. Oh, here we are, the other side view. The musket looks quite effective, actually, really. Again, doing a black band and then with a bit of the silver over the top for the musket bands. This kind of sabre hilt there was one of the most peculiar things that I never fully identified on a Spencer Smith miniature. Maybe someone can point out what it should have actually been. So with the adding the red facings, I started with that looks like a kind of a blood red gore or whatever it's called colour, chaps, from the Games Workshop Citadel range, doesn't it? So doing that as the intermediate coat before then putting on the bright scarlet. Let's have a look here. Yeah, there you are. That's giving you an impression of the undercoat for the red. And then I even gave him little scarlet gaiters, little ribbons around his gaiters. That's nice, isn't it? See, now there's a bunch of them. Looks much smarter. With all the musketeers very jealous behind, waiting to catch up. There you are, there's a painting process for you. Yeah, starting to look spanking, in fact. This is where my morale started to go up. After all those days and days of, oh my God, I'm just painting everything in monochrome, the addition of the red really makes it kind of jump out. Absolutely. And here we are. There's a few sort of, cinematic shots from various angles. This was obviously very late at night, I can tell, because it's quite dark. Now the regiment's finished. That's what we were looking for, folks. That's the regiment with all its drummers and officers and so forth. I did a few posed pictures here just for dramatic effect. That's the colonel. That's not a bad dapple grey horse, considering it's kind of painted old school style, just with, you know, building up from a dark grey to lighter greys to white, just a bit of old paintbrush stippling and stuff going on. He's quite pretty, quite pleased with him. These at the time, of course, were all still individually based, because that's what happened back in those days. Multiple basing wasn't the thing. So here we are. It's just a few pretty pictures of the regiment on parade, as it were. I think probably an overhead view. That's quite a nice overhead view, just to show you the sheer number of figures in this unit. So hang on, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 16 figures per company. So 16, 32, 64 rank and file. You got that? 64 rank and file, plus all these supernumeraries, drummers, lieutenants, regimental, sergeant majors, colonel. Wow. It was a monstrous undertaking. I've got, and I'll go through these very quickly. This is the Clincator Cuirassiera, going through a similar sort of process on the bench. We ended up basing them on these interesting rounded end bases. As John says, the proportions are excellent. I'm afraid they go in my not worth spending the time on box. Very good, John. Yeah, you know, it is one of those things. It was an act of, you know, sheer dedication. Anyway, there's the cavalry in their finished state. You know, And one of the things that no one noticed on the day or until quite a long time afterwards is that actually during the game I'd stuck the flag on upside down. It's part of the history of that particular unit, isn't it? So what can I say? Anyway, folks, so that was the build-up, right? That was the painting of the figures, the creation of the forces. As Brian says, yes, that I've just shown you would be almost an entire force by today's standard of game. True, very true. So now in here, I'm going to show you a few of the pictures from the game itself at the show. Let's have a look. That's it. Okay, so let me open these so you can see the action on the day itself. And it drew crowds. Lawrence and Trix and anyone else who was there will remember. It drew crowds because people were going, first of all, what the hell is that? Right? And secondly, wow, actually, whilst it's not what I'm used to, I have to admit, it looks really quite good. And it did. This combination of these, Phil chose this colour, which is kind of sort of akin to Goblin Green, GW's Goblin's Green, right? And all the various boards, in sections that made up the whole thing, hills, MDF hills and so forth. Phil made some beautiful buildings. All those buildings were made by Phil Ollie. And he did a cracking job because they, on the one hand, they're kind of symbolic of a townhouse, that kind of quite a simple feel to them, but also hugely appropriate. There was something utterly charming about those buildings. Many of the figures were Spencer Smiths. We also made use of, particularly for some of the cavalry and the Special Light Prince Regiment and what have you, there were Holger Erikssons. Now, those of you who may not be aware, Holger Eriksson was an amazing guy, and he sculpted, certainly the Spencer Smith figures were carved from wood, the master figures, from wood. And there's this other beautiful range that you can still get. They're actually marketed by Tradition of London. I think Peter at Spencer Smith Miniatures also stocks them or has access to them. The actual Holger Eriksson range that actually depict the Swedish army from the Great Northern War. And they are beautiful, exquisite figures. And if you've not seen them, I urge you to go and hunt out images of them. So this is an overall view from sort of the beginning of the battle. And here we are in action. On the left there, that's John Priest. There's me, looking older there than I do now. That's curious. Something wrong, obviously. And this is Steve Gill just in the corner of the picture here. And there's a big cavalry duff-up going there that looks like someone's been foolish enough to charge my Clinkator cuirassier with the hussars. I have to say, the actual day itself, the game itself, was all a bit of a blur. Until, I wrote about it afterwards in the magazine, as you'll see. But this is great fun. Absolutely great fun. We had a ball running the game, and the people just came and... Now here in the middle of these are Holger Eriksson cavalry, these beautiful charging dragoons. There's light infantry in the very foreground here. And there's all these beautiful, now I think they're Staddens, these beautiful grenadiers on the left here. I just love that photo. There's something about those Holger Eriksson figures, like with Spencer Smith, there's a kind of, how can I put this? A stately urgency about them. They've got this kind of relentless, we're going forwards. And those charging dragoons, those Holger Erikssons, and that officer there in the foreground, waggling their pointer around, they're just exquisite once they're painted. I have to report that The castings can be a bit iffy. There was quite a lot of flash to clean off them, and some of the parts are very delicate. You can see here actually the swords are very slender compared to the kind of castings you'd get today from a foundry or a Perry or anything of that kind. They're, it's part of their elegance, part of their beauty, but it's also part of the practical difficulties of going with this kind of figure. But John and his horses, he uses wonderful kind of enamel washes that build up. It's just, and they're just perfect for this kind of miniature. Perfect. Oh, hi there, Mariner Grimm. Hello. My favourite memory of the game was when John made my son's day by allowing him to move some of the figures around. Yes. Well, I think we made, we don't want to brag, I think we made quite a few people's day that day, because the nostalgia wave that overcame so many of the onlookers was just fantastic. And yes, I mean, there was a couple of kids that I brought in and let them move some stuff around. It was just lovely. The whole thing had a lovely atmosphere. And here we are. Here's one of the young lads that we got involved in the game. There's me looking kind of avuncular behind. Phil here in the foreground, stretching across to the middle of the table. Oh, I think that's John Kersey standing up in the left-hand corner there, having a chat with Steve. And John Priest obviously helping there. It was lovely that we got so many people. It went from being a demo game to more of a, participation game. We let people roll dice and so on. Hang on, we've had that picture before. Here's another kind of overhead shot. There's something about all those troops in elegant lines marching forward, and those Spencer Smith hussars with that kind of lovely kind of urge to them. All, no basing, all singly based. They were based on the either on the actual base that the miniature comes with, like many of the Spencer Smiths, or some of the cavalry that were a bit more, wobbly. We put them on these kind of thin MDF bases or plywood bases. One of the questions that's come up, of course, is, crikey, that's an awful lot of work just moving the troops, isn't it? True. Undeniably true. But that's part of that kind of gaming from a different age, where people had more time. There was no feeling that, oh gosh, what can we do to cut down the amount of time it takes to move these figures? Because people would play a game for all day, all weekend even, leave it set up overnight. In fact, there were some quite funny stories told by Charles Grant about Brigadier Peter Young, who when he went to visit them in Dover, his father Charles Grant, the late Charles Grant, invited Brigadier Peter Young to stay, and they'd play a game, based on the war game, probably one of those. They would hear noises in the middle of the night, and when they woke up in the morning and returned to the games room, they would find that certain regiments had strangely moved in the middle of the night. And when they went to visit Brigadier Peter Young at his house, Brigadier Peter Young had a trapdoor, a hatch in the middle of his table, and he, at certain times when there was action was thick and fast in the middle of the table, he was an absolute rascal. He would just dive under the table, disappear, and people would think, what's he doing? Is he tying a shoelace? And suddenly, a few seconds later, he'd emerge from this hatch in the middle of the table, scattering troops everywhere. Faint, oh, goodness me, terribly sorry. I didn't notice that any of your units were on that hatch. What can I say? It was a different time. And here's another shot. I think it's the last shot I've got here from the game of this wonderful cavalry charging. I have got a lot more pictures. I will post up a photo album on Flickr, probably, of pictures from the Sittangbad game, because they're just lovely to kind of pore over. These are the kind of pictures of stuff that I can spend ages just looking at troops arrayed in this kind of manner. And when we get to Mollwitz, you're going to see some more of this. Thanks for sticking with me, folks, because I think we've done an hour now, so it's time for another sip of coffee. And there's just one more thing I'm going to point out, which is if I switch to Adobe Acrobat again, let me go here. Where's it gone? This one, let's close. Here we go. Let's close up the other stuff. Right. I will make that a bit bigger so you can see better. But it's I don't know why. At the time, let me move it so I'm not in the way. I wrote a couple of articles, both this article and the article about Mollwitz, under a pen name of Michael Button. That's actually the name of one of my cousins. Hello, Michael. He probably won't be watching this, but anyway, he knows about this. I just for some reason someone persuaded me, you don't want too many articles in your magazine that got your name on it, Henry, or people will think that you're desperate and you haven't got enough articles and the magazine will go bust. Well, the magazine did sort of go bust eventually, but certainly not because of that. So there's this peculiar thing where I wrote articles about a couple of things under the pen name of Michael Button. Here, it's all revealed. The truth is out. Anyway, I'm going to post this up as well so you can download it. It's just my after-action report with some more photos in, as you can see, of the build-up to the game itself, the reaction of the public, and so on and so forth. And it's actually one of the articles I've, that over the years I'm most proud of. I think partly because we were very emotionally invested in this game. We put a lot of thought into it, all those decisions about the particular aesthetic that the game should have and so on and so forth. We put a lot of thought into it, and I think the article reflects that. So looks like this might last 2 hours. We'll see. That was Sittangbad, folks, and as if that wasn't enough hard work and self-punishment, we decided to do another one. Oh yes. And you've already had a clue as to what it was, of course, because somewhere, if I change my folder, bear with me a moment, over here, excuse me, let's get this again, let's open that up, and let's now go back to Photoshop. Okay. We decided to do Mollwitz from the war game. So what I'm going to do is now open up some pages related to the Battle of Mollwitz, and this from the war game, from page 111 onwards, is the story of the Battle of Mollwitz. Now, one of the differences, of course, between Mollwitz and Sittangbad is Mollwitz was a real battle. 10th of April 1741, as he says at the beginning of the chapter right here, at the beginning of the War of the Austrian Succession, not the 7 Years' War, folks, the War of the Austrian Succession, or the First Silesian War. And Charles was very strong on his history, and he gave a very good historical background to the game. So here we are, the next page. And in reality, this is one of the things I loved about Charles Grant. He was a great one for what's called bathtubing, which is to say, oh, hi, Derek, nice to see you, for bathtubing. Which is to say, you take a real battle and all the real units that were actually there, and you think, well, I haven't got enough wargames figures to do that at that scale. Obviously, I think more recently, as the hobbies developed, people have become more innovative, thinking, well, I do want to portray all those 31 Prussian infantry battalions, and if I use 10mm or 6mm, I can. There's a few very lucky individuals amongst us who can afford maybe to do that even in 28 or 30mm, right? If they've got a few bob and probably someone to help them paint, or you're part of a club, of course. Let's be fair, if you're part of a club. 31 infantry battalions, 30 cavalry squadrons, 3 hussar squadrons, 37 field and 16 heavy guns, and so on and so forth for the Prussians, the Austrians. What Charles Grant was brilliant at was saying, well, I haven't got that, so what can I fit on my war games table? And he took the gamer through the process, as I explained earlier. He took you through the process of, well, actually, this is how we're going to portray it on the table. And there's the map from the book. There's his 9-foot by 7-foot table, and there's the war games units that he used. And again, of course, because he's using his own imagination's units, not the real units. Now, some of the unit names may actually coincide with real historical units from the Prussian or Austrian army or whatever, but Charles Grant used his armies from the Vereinigte Freie Städte and the Grand Duchy of Lorraine that were always at each other's throats. So effectively, the units he's got here listed for the Austrians, well, you can see they're actually French, right? Whereas the Prussian army, some of them are real, Prussian units or whatever, but a lot of them are just from his Vereinigte Freie Städte. Some of them have completely made up names, right? But all the same, it was lovely to see. And this is, people ask me, why did you get into imaginations, Henry? Answer, this. I saw him doing this. And this was a serious man, a highly intelligent man with a very respectable job and a very respectable, track record and everything. And he was playing war games not with the real units, not with the real armies. He substituted his own imagination's armies that were part of the campaigns he fought with his son Charles Stuart Grant and Stuart Asquith and Brigadier Peter Young and others, right? So all these Austrian units, look, Normandy, Picardy, Bulkley, Dillon, Royal Ecossais, they're not Austrian, they're French. But he very happily just says, well, I haven't got those Austrian units, so we're going to substitute these. And what's wrong with that? Nothing. Nothing's wrong with that. Let's look at the next picture. The next page. So, if you remember, we looked at, that was the actual historical order of battle on this page. And so what he's done is bathtubed it and turned it into this. 2 regiments of grenadiers, 8 regiments of line infantry, blah, 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 blah. Okay? And he even makes a note. It will be noted at once. He had this wonderful, slightly pompous but rather lovely writing style. It will be noted at once that the 3-to-1 superiority in guns enjoyed by the Prussians has been reduced to one of 2-to-1. This was done for 2 reasons. First, I did not want to make the artillery disparity so devastating. Even 2-to-1 was bad enough as I found. And second, I believe that this was a justifiable reduction, feeling that some of the Prussian heavy guns were not likely to have come up in time to take part, at least in the initial stages of the battle. Should I be wrong, I must plead wargamer's license. Now that's a phrase we don't hear as much these days. But back in the day, the Charles Grants and Don Featherstones and others used that phrase quite often. I can remember it cropping up in war games articles. Oh, yes, well, you might not think it's right, but I plead wargamer's license. Now, the fact is, he's not just making these decisions willy-nilly. As I said, Charles Grant was really hot on his history, right? And so he's thought deeply. It's not just an off-the-cuff decision. He's thought deeply about this decision about the artillery. And I wanted to mention this because we're all war gamers, and those of us who played many horse and musket games. And in fact, Andy McMaster, if you're still up there somewhere watching, bless your heart, you will remember during our Ayton games when we played with my rules, decisions were made on at least 1 or 2 occasions where people said, do you know what, we're going to halve the effect of the artillery. Hi Tom, nice to see you. Yeah, we're going to halve the effect of the artillery because one of the things that can happen, and it's an odd thing, is we can play a game where we feel like, oh yes, actually all the melee rules that seem to, the balance came out just as it did in the real battle. The musketry, oh yes, the balance, absolutely, we got that spot on. Why is it that the artillery has carpeted the war games table with corpses, whereas in reality it didn't seem that powerful? What is it about war games artillery that often means it ends up being disproportionately powerful on the wargames table? It's an interesting question. I'm sure there's an article in that. There's probably been articles about that. I may have even published some of them. What am I saying? But that's a really interesting point about the fact that he's made this deliberate decision to reduce the effect of the artillery. There we go. Let's have our next image up. So the next page, and so one of the frustrating things about the war game, this is a good, I'm glad this came up. One of the frustrating things about the war game as a book is it was first actually published as a series of articles. I think it might have even been in the Battle for Wargamers, something like that, or even going further back, sort of military modelling. And then it was sort of cobbled together in a book. And obviously what happens is when you're writing a series of articles and you're just writing them on demand, often you realise you've missed things out. And there's no consolidated rule set in this book, The War Game. He just introduces the rules as necessary as you go along. And here we are. One of the things he introduces at this point is, oh yes, by the way, for musketry, grenadiers fire in groups of 4 instead of the usual line infantry groups of 6. So a volley from a full grenadier regiment consists of 12 groups as opposed to the 8 of ordinary infantry. And so it's like, I can remember frantically having a notebook as I was reading the book and extracting the rules as best I could as I went through reading the book. Oh, right, okay, so I need to add that into the musketry thing. You know, we laugh about it now, or I do, but at the time it was actually really frustrating. I need to rotate this image. This is image, rotate 90 degrees clockwise. This is the photo from the book of the opening stages of the Battle of Mollwitz. Look at this tatty old table. Look at the chips. It's, you know, chipboard or plywood or something like that. An old table tennis table with some bits added on. But still, despite, you know, if there's a number of interesting things about this image. You know, can I zoom in any further? It's a bit blurry because it's obviously been scanned in from a book. Here we go. A number of interesting things. First of all, yes, it's a plain, bare wood table. There's no lumps and bumps. There's no attempt at verisimilitude in terms of, you know, an open plane or whatever. The hills, those couple of hills in the background, they look like they're some sort of chipboard or something that's just been cut roughly to shape and, you know, sploshed with paint. The trees over in the background there, you can see these lines of trees. Those are triang trees. They still turn up occasionally on eBay. If you see any and get any, well done, because it means that John Priest hasn't got hold of them before you. The buildings, okay, now the way Charles made his buildings was rather lovely because, as you've in the book it explains, he made them with so you could lift the top up. You built the ruins. He used balsa wood, I seem to recall. You built, you know, you cut out a base, and then you inset from the edge of the base. You built the ruins so that they would fit inside the shell of the building, so that when the building got blatted with howitzer fire, usually, or round shot or whatever, you could actually remove the top of the building to reveal the ruins. I still think that's a lovely thing, and I often still build my own buildings in exactly the same way. Whether I'm using foam card is probably a preferred option these days rather than balsa wood, but I still do that. I just think it's lovely that if a building takes fire and, you know, gets blatted, you can actually lift it off and there's the ruins, and once the fire's died down, you can station troops in the ruins. The other thing you'll notice, as you'll notice, you know, when I show the pictures from the actual game, the miniatures are 30mm, which is what, 1/56th scale, something like that. The buildings are smaller. They're much more like 1/72nd scale, 20mm. And yet, when you look at that picture, are you at all disturbed by that? Is it screaming at you, oh my God, what's wrong with the buildings? They're all too small for the figures. Well, technically, yes, but he was also concerned about the footprint. One of the things that if you have a lot of 28mm buildings, unless you're fighting something sort of skirmish level where it's important to have everything 1-to-1 scale, the problem is that you can have something that's supposed to be a village, but you can only fit one house in the area that's supposed to be the village. Whereas if you take the scale of the buildings down, and John's pointing out about buildings that include ruins. Yeah, if you take the scale down, you can at least be more representative of what that collection of buildings is supposed to represent. Is it just a single farm, in which case that's fine, but is it a village? Is it a small town? Is it a major town? And the bigger your buildings are on your wargames table, the more problematic it becomes to actually represent the thing that you want to represent. You end up having a city represented by like 2 houses. It's one of those wargaming conundrums that unless you are using, say, microscale buildings with microscale troops where you can actually, well, it's a town, it had 50 houses in it, and there's space to do the 50 houses because your troops are represented 1-to-1, High to Mark Backhouse and Sydney Roundwood with their joy of 2mm. That becomes a possibility, but for most of us there's a compromise to be made between the scale of the troops, the ground scale, the scale of the buildings and so forth. It's a juggling act, and at the end of the day it just comes down to your aesthetic preference. If you're happy with having a town represented by 2 buildings, okay. But if you prefer to have something that's more literal in its representation, you need to go another way. But Charles Grant, he was the first person I can remember actually talking about that as a subject and making me think about, oh yeah, crikey, he's got a good point there. The same, of course, is true of trees. One tree representing an entire wood. Right? There's some rule sets where the scale isn't made specific or anything, but in the war game, he's very specific. 1 inch equals 10 yards, 1 move equals 1 minute, and so forth. So if you're being very specific and stating your scales, then this becomes more of an issue than if it's, say, a game of Warhammer Fantasy Battle or something of that kind, where they're very much, it's a unit, whatever. It's a few houses, whatever. It's a wood, whatever. Okay? Even though, interestingly and ironically, the people who were behind Warhammer Fantasy Battle, of course, were all those people that I've interviewed on my show, who were also historical wargamers, many of whom grew up with the Featherstones, the Grants, and the Brigadier Peter Youngs, and were fully aware of actually the knots you can tie yourself in about scale. Anyway, let me move on to another picture. Here we are. The Graf von Grund commanding the Prussian army at Mollwitz. That's a lovely figure. Now, do you know what? This figure appeared on eBay. Was it earlier this year or towards the end of last year? No one had known what whose hands it had passed through. It was originally in the collection of Brigadier Peter Young, and yeah, there's a sentimental story attached to it. Here we go. General officers and their suites naturally were in addition to the above totals, each 2-regiment brigade having its commander assisted by an ADC, while each army commander had 2 such plus his personal standard. The Austrians, having regard to the heavy metal of the opposition, deemed it wise that Count Fritz von Thalenheim, Marshal General of the Vereinigte Freie Städte, doubtless an ancestor of him who played such a part in the affair of the prisoner of Zenda over a century later, should take to the field. At the head of the Prussian chain of command was one General Graf von Grund, this being something which caused no little surprise. In a previous campaign, the great and victorious one waged by the Vereinigte Freie Städte against the electorate of Teutoburg-Althofen, this individual, while concealing himself in a cellar during the bombardment of a strong place he purported to command, had been struck upon the cranium by a piece of flying masonry. This mishap resulted in his prompt demise eyes, but, strange to relate, it was later reported that he'd been seen alive and well in the Teutoburg capital, and it was put about that he'd made a miraculous recovery. Lovely stuff! You need more of this in Wargames books, I think. Here we go. Commanding the Austrian army at the Battle of Mollwitz, Fritz von Thalenheim, Marshal General of the Vereinigte Freistädte, with 2 orderlies. And in fact, those orderlies, I think they might be Grenadier miniatures from back in the day. They're certainly not Staddens or Surens, from what I can tell from that picture. But anyway, there we go. So let me just get you through, you know. And here's the orders given to the 2 armies. So the Austrians defending. The left flank of the Prussian army is to be attacked by the entire cavalry with the object of preventing him bringing all his artillery into action. They were worried about that artillery. And at the same time driving off his cavalry and forcing his infantry back towards Hemsdorf. Our infantry will occupy the line Mollwitz-Grüningen, as it will almost certainly be in this direction that the enemy will launch his major effort. If he's able to form a strong front with artillery support to face our cavalry, the cavalry attack will not be pressed home. The mounted troops in this case will form up to the right of Mollwitz to await events. And the Prussians wrote, part of the infantry with strong artillery support will form a front facing northwest to contain the Austrian cavalry, which they were worried about, should it attack. The remainder of the infantry will advance and seize Grüningen, then swing westwards towards Mollwitz. So, this is one of those things, again, back in the day, we wrote orders for our troops. And in the war game, you wrote orders at the beginning of the battle before it started. And then you wrote orders every move. Right? There's something almost sad. I kind of miss that. But then we had simultaneous moves as well. But just a reminder on this map. I'm just taking you back to this map to remind you that the places. So Grüningen is that place on the hill over on the right-hand side. With the Austrians, well, the Frenchy sounding Austrians from Lorraine tasked to defend that. Mollwitz is this bigger conurbation in the centre, and Langwitz is here over on the left hand side. Opposite them there's Pamplitz on the left flank of the Prussians, and there's Hemsdorf on the right flank of the Prussians with those woods. Just as a reminder as we go forward. Then, of course, the lovely thing that happens in the war game is he gives a narrative of what actually happened in the game. I'm not going to read through this in great detail, but it's just to let you know that it's there and to let you see it. Because one of the other things that was done back in the days of black and white, they did lovely maps and diagrams and showed you what the troops had done. You can see here's the Prussians advancing on their right flank, the Austrians rushing to get to protect Grüningen, the complete emptiness of the Austrian right flank here because their cavalry all rushes forward to put pressure on the Prussian left. Now the Prussians, seeing the Austrian cavalry coming, scarpered their cavalry heading over towards Hemsdorf, whilst their infantry in massed columns headed towards Grüningen. And then, let's have a look at the next picture. There's this wonderful incident where the Austrian cavalry tried to charge the Prussian guns. And Charles Grant did this lovely little diagram explaining how a unit of the Prussian infantry did two 6 inches full move advances, and then 1 4-inch advance, because you're allowed to advance 4 inches and still fire at full effect as long as your muskets were loaded. And so they basically swept round the flank of the oncoming Austrian cavalry as it approached the gun, and they got canistered by the guns and blatted from the flank by the Prussian infantry. A great moment in the game, absolutely. And it was, as he says in the description, it was all a matter of perfect timing by the Prussians. And the next page has got a lovely photograph of that very incident. As it says, the Austrian light cavalry on the point of being shattered by musketry. The Batruski infantry, here they were, the nearer of the Prussian regiments, are about to make a 4-inch move and fire into the flank of the charging horsemen. I love that photo. To me, that's one of the iconic photos of the time. Absolutely. One of the iconic photographs of wargaming of that era that imprinted on me. This is what a wargame should look like. Big regiments of cavalry screaming towards big regiments of infantry with big batteries of artillery in the middle of it. I mean, limbers. So many horse and musket games, they go, can't be asked with limbers. What a shame. Having the limbers there, first of all, it's a clear indication, is your gun limbered or unlimbered? Secondly, it's an indication that an artillery battery takes up an awful lot of room, creates an awful lot of clutter, and Charles Grant's limbers are only 4-horse limbers. He's already cut them down from 6 or 8 horse that they would have been in reality. For big guns, they might have even been 10 or 12 horses. So you can't really advance infantry laterally through a load of limbers. And it just looks glorious. I'm going to zoom in a bit on that photo just so you can see it better. That is one of my all-time favourite wargames photos. And of course, one of the things that affected us when we came to actually recreate the game was the photos in black and white. We have no idea what colour uniforms these people are wearing, right? We made assumptions because, Vereinigte Freistädte, they're a bit like Prussia, so probably the uniforms are all dark blue. The one thing you could tell is that the Lorraine infantry playing the Austrians had white coats because white looks white even in black and white. But there's this wonderful scene that I was enraptured by, and it's in black and white. It's still to this day, here I am all these years later. 1971 this book was published. I look at that photo, I absolutely love it. The sense of anticipation of that crunch approaching is just fantastic. Let's have a look at the next page, which shows us at the top a view of Hemsdorf with the Prussian infantry in full march towards the attack on Grüningen. And again, I'm going to zoom in on that because it's here we go. Again, it's black and white, but look at that massive infantry coming over that ridge and approaching. There's just something thrilling. Big units. Thanks for the input there as well. Again, Mariner Grimm, about the building size and stuff. Yes, noted. Thanks for all the comments, folks. It's nice to know that you're there and haven't fallen asleep yet. But there we are. I'm sorry if you think I'm just babbling about this, but again, one of the greatest wargames photos ever taken in my book, because that's what I imprinted on. I came away thinking, so that's what a wargame should look like, with masses and masses of troops. Just one of those things. Let me move on to the next page, where again we've got a lovely photograph. The Prussian attack about to be launched against Grüningen, over in the far corner there, where Picardy and Normandy infantry are hastening to take up their positions. Look at that. Look at the artillery limbers. Great big artillery limbers. The cavalry. There's that lovely, because this appears on the front cover of the wargame as well. You will recall that image of these white-coated infantry rushing to take their position in front of Grüningen. Will they get there in time? Will they stop these mass columns opposite them? Look at all those troops, all those Prussians. Love it. Love it. Nearly there on going through the book. Here we've got another map showing the climax of the battle. The position after move 13, where, look at this. You've got the Prussians squeezing past the the edge of Grüningen there, with the musketeers rushing to counter that mass Prussian infantry assaulting the town. The Austrian cavalry licking its wounds back here. Fabulous. 13 moves, folks. 13 moves. Look at the losses in figures. This is in figures, of course, because it was whole figure casualties. None of you Bruce Quarry 1 to 33 here, ladies and gentlemen. Single figure casualties. The Prussians lost 116 infantry and only 1 cavalry, whereas the Austrians lost 104 infantry and 56 cavalry. Wow. So, yes, as the lines at the bottom there. Indeed, it was evident here that the Prussians did in fact feel that the battle was going well for them. For a red and inflamed visage, bisected laterally by enormous, and I think the next word is moustaches, if I remember correctly. Moustaches, indeed, and crowned by a tricorn heavily laced with gold, could be seen peering from the fringe of trees surrounding Hemsdorf. This belonged without a doubt to the egregious von Grunt, who, up to this moment it appears, had been sampling the strong liquors purveyed at a hostelry in the town, the Elector's Head, and whose spirits were now sufficiently fortified to cause him to view what was happening about him. Yeah. And again, he talks about that mismatch of the power of wargaming guns, that the Austrian guns took a bit. They lost 2 gun models, which is like, ooh. So let's just get to the end of this bit, folks, and this is the end position of the Battle of Mollwitz from the war game. I don't know why I've got a guideline there. With the Prussian infantry having swept through Grüningen and the Austrians pretty much in full retreat, licking their wounds. I love the way that he says this has been a purposely brief account of a long and most exciting battle, and I've only given a gist of what took place. Seems wonderfully detailed to me, but as he said, you know, when you get all that hand-to-hand fighting around the town and stuff, there were so many little individual firefights and acts of heroism and melees and to and fro. It's one of the really fascinating things about fighting in built-up areas. It's quite tricky to create effective rules for fighting in built-up areas, but wow, when you do, it's worth it. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed that little tour through the actual war game book, ladies and gentlemen. I'm trying to clear the screen here in Photoshop so I can now show you some other things. Let's get rid of that lot. Oop, don't save that. So that's the war game. There's the front cover. Now, the game that we actually put on, the next thing I'm going to do is to show you some bits and pieces that I created. I'm just looking over here. I've got 2 screens. If you're wondering why is he looking over there? It's because I've got another screen over here, folks. And I'm setting something up in into. Oh, hang on, I've done that. Into Adobe Acrobat Professional. So let me just get those things open and ready to rock and roll. Okay, have I got duplicates here? Oh, I think I might have some duplicates. Let me just check. Oh, triple duplicates. You don't want triple duplicates of things. Bear with me. I think I've already... no, that's good. That's good. That's good. That's good. That's good. That's good. Oh, considering it's the first time I've used this software, I'm relieved that it seems to be mostly going okay. I hope you agree. Are you enjoying this, folks? Or am I boring you rigid? I hope you enjoy. Give me a thumbs up or something if you're enjoying it, and that I'm not sending you to sleep. Right, I can see there's a chat going on there between David and Tom. Wow, that's interesting. It's nice if you guys make friends in the chat column. That's fantastic. Right, let me now switch our view to... Thanks, Tom. Let me switch to Adobe Acrobat so you can see a bit more about what's going on. So somewhere here, yes, I've got the... Okay. Oh, yes. This is important. This is important because look, there's that branding again. There was still the group of us, the war gamers, when we came the following year, 2007, to stage the game of Mollwitz at Partizan. So I was able to reuse the branding and just substitute the word Mollwitz for Sittangbad. Okay. This is different from when we did Sittangbad, because with Sittangbad we had to start from scratch. But what happened with Mollwitz was the four of us, so me, Phil Ollie, Steve Gill, John Priest, there's our names. We thought, well, okay, we'd love to stage Mollwitz, iconic game. For half of us, I think Sittangbad have been the iconic battle. For the other half of us, Mollwitz have been the iconic battle. So we decided, okay, we're going to do both. Let's do Mollwitz as well. Now, obviously, Mollwitz was a bigger undertaking. A lot more units needed, more buildings and that kind of stuff. And we thought, well, I suppose, oh crikey, we probably could do it, given enough time and resources. But obviously, yeah, major undertaking. But one of the things that happened was, because my Battle Games magazine had been running for a while by then, and our Sittangbad game, I'd written the article about that, and it had been very well received. And I had managed to get two very important people to write columns in my magazine. The first one, Stuart Asquith, who was writing a series on battles for wargamers for me. And the other one was his good friend, Charles Stewart Grant, who, just for Battle Games magazine, revived the tabletop teasers and started producing new tabletop teasers for the first time since Practical Wargamer and Battle for Wargamers. After a long gap, what was that, a decade or more, started doing tabletop teasers again. So I was in regular correspondence with Charles, and also because he lives in Scotland, and at the time Phil Ollie was living in Scotland, and they bumped into each other at various shows and I think maybe even a club event or two. And so I had a chat with Phil and what have you, and we said, well, do you think Charles might be interested in getting involved in this in some way, even if it was just giving his blessing? So Phil said, well, I think I'm going to be seeing Charles at something next week. I'll have a word. And he had a word, and Charles's response was amazing. Charles said, well, gosh, yes, absolutely, that sounds grand idea. Moreover, what's more, if you want to do that, I've still got all the original Spencer Smith miniatures that appeared in the book. And we were like, what? Seriously? Would we be allowed to use them? He said, well, they haven't been out of their boxes for a long time. He had them all stored in cigar boxes or something. And that was one of the things about Charles Grant, he was a pretty decent painter, but he used to just scoop up his regiments at the end of the day and just shove them in a box. So it was like, wow, okay, he couldn't guarantee what condition they might be in. And I, as someone who's collected lots of Spencer Smiths, know, oh my God, particularly if they've been painted with enamel, they can end up with this awful, most of us call it ankle rot, where you go to, if you're not careful, picking up a miniature, the musket will break off, or the thing will just shatter at the ankles and detach from its base. And it's like, you've now got a dead figure. It literally, something happens, oxidization of the plastic or something, it starts turning to dust and becoming incredibly brittle. Interestingly, figures that have been painted in acrylics, particularly if they've been given this undercoat of PVA, don't seem to suffer in the same way. I don't know the science behind that. Someone out there may know and understand why that might be. But the figures painted with enamels, particularly if they were gloss enamels, seem to have suffered terribly. Or it might just be coincidental, and it's just random batches of the strange plastic that they moulded these old Spencer Smiths from that has caused the problem. So anyway, Charles said, I've still got all the original figures. And we went, what? Could we use them? Oh, yes. Not a problem. It would be good to give them an outing. You haven't still got the buildings as well, have you? He said, oh, I'll have a look. Oh, yes, I've still got the buildings. Most of them, I think. Oh, my God. Now, if you're a fan of a book from, printed in 1971, and the man whose father wrote it says, I still have all the figures. I still have all the buildings. Yes, you can use them. We were utterly gobsmacked. Obviously extremely grateful, but utterly gobsmacked. It's like a dream come true. So what this meant was, other than a few bits and bobs, we didn't have to paint any figures in preparation for this game, which actually, having thought, oh my God, this is going to be much more difficult than Sittangbad to put on, it was actually a lot easier. You know, when we spoke to Trix and Lawrence and they said, oh yeah, we'd love to have that game at the show. And we mentioned, oh yes, and Charles Grant's coming and Stuart Asquith's coming. Wow, that's even better. So actually, the only work that we needed to do was a few bits and bobs, a few, replacement figures, I think, were put together. I made bounce sticks, canister cones, howitzer burst circles, so out of wood, strip wood, and wire. I think I used coat hanger wire, actually, just sort of soldered together. And then all the graphics stuff. So this is what I'm taking you through at the moment. The first thing you see, yes, there's the badges for us guys. And then the other important addition to the badge collection was that. Yes, special guests Stuart Asquith and Charles S. Grant. Wow! We couldn't believe they became... yes, we'd love to be part of your team. Thank you for asking. Because they'd been out of the limelight for such a long time. You've got to remember this. They'd been out of the limelight for such a long time that they were now slightly surprised that anyone would be interested to see them and talk to them. Which to us was like, but hang on a minute, you're two of the biggest names in the hobby. Why would people not want to see it? But there you are. They're modest chaps. So that was the badges I made for them. The header boards, of course, now look like that, with that same Egiziano and the colours matching the cover of the book. There it is. Hello. So that was the header boards. Then, let's come back here. I did a flyer as well. And again, I'll post this online so you can read what we gave out. Me waxing lyrical about the war game and what it meant to us and so on and so forth. And then there's actually a copy of the rules from the war game that I'd collated from various sources. Now, let me have a look. Someone there on the side mentioned this book because I've already talked about the fact that if you go through the war game and try to extract the rules, you discover that there's a whole load of gaps, a massive gaps. Somewhere here, let's have a look. Have I got the... Yes, something else I need to open up for you. I created a play sheet. Okay. Consolidating all the war games rules, all the diagrams that you needed, and also brought in all the rules that hadn't been mentioned in the original book. And all those as well ended up in Charles's next foray, which was the War Game Companion, which is his way of saying, oh yes, terribly sorry. The fact is that as soon as the original book was published, the rules were out of date. Me and my dad had actually changed the way that we did certain things. And so this book brings everything together in a way that makes it clear. It suddenly makes the rules make sense. All the little extra rules that we used were all brought into this. For this book, I actually did a lot of the photography. I did this photograph, which I still love, of all the regiments in Charles's army, all their standards. The flags of the Vereinigte Freie Städte. Lovely. And of course, it was at this point I was like, Oh my God, their uniform is sky blue. Oh my God, their uniform is brown, red, green. Extraordinary. Some other bits and pieces that Charles put together. I think a couple of the flags were done by Phil Ollie, actually, for some of the commanders and what have you. This is a lovely book. If you could still get hold of it from Ken Trotman Publishing, or maybe even through Caliver Books. If you're a fan of wargaming of this era, if you're a fan of the war game, you need it really, because it explains so much. And as I say, there's a few bits and pieces of mine in there. I designed the cover to match, but with different colouring, the war game. And I provided some photos and stuff. I didn't do the interior layout, I don't believe. But also, yes, my play sheets were also published in this book at the back. So you could actually photocopy them or tear them out or whatever. So I'm going to be putting the play sheets up on the website as well for you to be able to access. Oh yes, I did a little bit towards this chapter on campaigning. Can you see there? There's one of my maps of hexes from one of my maps, campaign maps. So there we are. I played a small part in this book, and it's lovely because it completes the story that needed to be completed. Suddenly the rules made sense. There was a lot of stuff about what's happened to Charles's own wargaming armies over the years, some of the other campaigns and stuff that he fought with his dad, American Civil War stuff and what have you, things about the various personalities that grew up and the stories behind the personalities, some stories about Brigadier Peter Young and so on. So that's lovely stuff. But anyway, that's the play sheets that I've shown you there, and the full rules as I extracted them. And then there's the article that I wrote after the game we played, before I show you some of the many pictures from the game. So again, look, I wrote it as Michael Button. I admitted the photos were by me, but I pretended that someone called Michael Button wrote this article. I've learnt my lesson. I look back now and think, oh, you prat, why did you do that? But it was simply because, I didn't want people to think that I was writing too many articles in my own magazine. Hey ho. So this is the article, and again, I will post this up on the website. But I think there's a few pictures in there, but I'll skip through these, because I think what I want to do to kind of, as we head towards rounding up this monstrous video occasion, and thanks for sticking with me, those of you who's sticking with me. David Lee says it's available on the History of Wargaming project as well. Okay. That's wargaming.co. Wargaming.co, isn't it? John Curry. So thanks for that heads up, David. Let's have a look at what I've got here. And I've got, oh gosh, I've got quite a lot of photographs here, haven't I? So some of them are a bit dark. I'll do them in small batches, this lot. So here's the first few, because they do, let me switch to Photoshop. Okay. Let me go back to, where's the first one? I've got the last one. I want the first one. This is important to see, because as I discussed with Phil Ollie in my recent podcast with him, recent battle chat, there's a bit of a blurry photo, but it doesn't matter. There was the Partizans were being held in Kelham Hall, and this is kind of on the far outskirts of Newark. Lovely building, bit dark and dingy. But anyway, opposite Kelham Hall, there was a lovely, I don't know if it's still there, but there was a lovely hotel with a lovely restaurant called the Red House. So before both Sittangbad and this game, we decided to stay overnight in the hotel so we would all be together to get up and then march across the next morning. And this was taken the evening before, obviously a lovely weather outside in May, and we were all having a drink in the bar. And so if I waggle my cursor around, that's Charles S. Grant on the left, There's John Priest there and his wife here, and that's Phil Ollie in the middle, and that's Steve Gill and his wife Carol, and Stuart Asquith, and the top of the head of my dear Annie, my other half. So that's us having a drink in the bar before dinner. You can see all the menus. I can't quite read what's on the menu, and it's making me hungry. Just the night before the game. And then pictures from the game itself. Let's go back here. This is the setup stage. Charles and Steve setting up troops. And here you can see taking the troops out of the boxes. They'd all just been bunged in these little boxes. And we were like slightly horrified. It's like, oh my God, they're all rattling about, all these very brittle Spencer Smiths. But it was remarkable how many of them had survived. But this is us setting up the game at the beginning of the day at Partizan. And this was the moment where Phil and I were just looking at each other going, oh my God, that's amazing. Oh my God. All those black and white photographs that we've been staring at for all these years. And suddenly now we can see what's happening. So they're the Vereinigte Freie Städte side. I was very much on the Lorraine side, as well as dashing around taking photographs. But here's the first Vereinigte Freie Städte, i.e. Prussian troops, coming out of the box to be put in the positions that they were shown in that map from the book. Keep skipping. Here's another one of Charles from behind. Some of them, the light, everyone who's ever been to Kelham Hall for Partizan or the other Partizan will forgive the lighting in many of the photographs, because they will remember what a nightmare it was. You know, when the sun was out in the right direction and it fell on your table, it was fantastic for photography. If a cloud came across or whatever, suddenly you were plunged into gloom and your camera would be setting off its flash, you know, every 5 minutes, and you don't get the same kind of quality with flash. You get this kind of foreground blitzing. But here we are. There's the miniatures being set up on the table, and here's Phil and John setting up the Lorrainers. If I zoom in a bit on them, some of these are very blurry because it was like long exposure time because of the lighting conditions. But there you are. You're getting the gist, aren't you? Here's let's move on again. Keep getting that one up. Charles and Steve. More of these figures coming out of the boxes. You can see they're just all bunged in compartments in these boxes. And they have, Charles in the interim had mounted them all on card bases, but on individual card bases. So every figure is getting placed and moved individually. There are no multiple bases here whatsoever. Slightly better shot. There's my bounce stick and howitzer not bounce stick, my canister cone and howitzer burst circle that I made, all shiny back then. Other games being set up in the background, but you can just see this is just the start. The sheer volume of troops. Here we are, a bit of a flash thing. This wonderful Lorraine/Austrian cavalry. You can see, you remember that incident from the book that we talked about. There's those cannon, and there's that nasty infantry that, in the book at least, did its damage. You can see down here in the foreground, actually, the buildings with these troops right next to them. You can see, because these were painted with enamels, quite simple style, but I think someone might mentioned earlier, I think that is Dover Church that's based on, or one of the others is. Maybe it's that one over in the background. But all this Austrian cavalry, all singly based. There's all those wonderful hussars. I love it. And here's the town of Gröningen with the Lorrainers rushing to defend it. Did we decide to set things up slightly later than in the book itself? Well, I think we were pretty accurate about, you know, where we place things. So, and this is this the Dillon or Bulkley regiment here, the Irish wild geese with the red coats on, of course, red coats, green facings. And there's those buildings, there's that scale thing. Look here, but they look fine. They just look strange effect, but they look kind of in keeping with what's on the table. So let's close those up and go a bit further. Let me grab a bunch more. So if I grab sort of like 8 to 10 at a time, hopefully we'll get through these fairly quickly. Here we come. While that's happening, I'll grab some more coffee. Okay, let's go back to the other end. See, this is where the atmosphere starts to build. The games, you can just see this mass of Prussian troops heading towards Groningen there. The Lorrainers coming around to defend it. I think we're pretty much all set up here. And already, there's the group of staff officers in the rear. These little simple triangle trees, buildings. Hey, it's the war game. Some of the units, I can't remember which ones it is off the top of my head. I will have to check. I can refer, can't I, to the photograph that I took that's in the War Game Companion. So in the foreground here with that lovely stripy flag, that is the Livgarden infantry. These guys here with yellow coats, making them slightly Saxon in appearance. And behind them, I can identify from the flag, that is the Sobieski infantry. Wow. Who's this lot with a cross? That is Ostergotland infantry. And I think we've just got a glimpse at the side there of Oldenburg infantry just coming into shot on the left here. Zoom in again from a different angle. So that unit there was Ostergotland. Behind them with that flag, I can tell you that's the Pfalz-Sonderheim infantry. And here at the front is the blue coats here. Let's have a look at that. Who are they with the yellow cross? Oh, that's not in the book. Shock, horror, probe, scandal. So off the top of my head, I can't tell you who that is. That's terrible. They weren't in the photograph. Maybe what happened was after the game, Charles accidentally broke that figure, so it didn't end up in my photograph. Never mind, we'll live. But hey, just another glorious photo of the action building. And from another angle. I'm very photography about these sort of things, so I'll do portrait, I'll do landscape and see what I can get in. Someone anachronistic, certainly not 18th century in the background there, but that's a nice photograph. Here we go. A peek from over the church, just looking across. That's my other half, Anne, in the far distance there at the end of the table. View from behind, heading towards Charles's trousers. That's one of those war games hazards, isn't it? You take pictures of games in progress and it's like, yeah, it's only after you've taken the photograph you think, I just wish I'd asked Charles to move a little bit. Let me fit this in. There's Charles next to Phil. Both looking down and going, oh my God, this is amazing. There's the handouts I protect. There's my Battle Games dice box. Lots of dice for the war game rules. And this is a nice shot where they're echoing each other's body language and they both decided to scratch their head at exactly the same moment. Exactly the same moment. That's rather lovely. Here's those infantry defending Groningen. Now, yeah, you could say that regiment bears a striking resemblance to my own Regiment von Eintopf, but I can tell you that is purely coincidence. That is purely coincidence. But it's kind of nice that my Regiment von Eintopf looks similar to them. My flag's better. These are sort of Frenchy looking flags. Some of them are quite boring, really. But there's those buildings. Again, I draw your attention, ladies and gentlemen, to those wonderful balsa wood buildings. And how right they look. I mean, he's painted them plain white, and then he's got a pen or something and just gone in and indicated bits of brickwork. Very simple, painted brown window frame, silver glass, no messing about. And yet, you could go to an awful lot more time and effort, but at the end of the day, he's created functional war games buildings. He wasn't too concerned about winning architecture awards. They're just lovely functional war games buildings. All right, I'm going to rattle down here. What's that? David saying he'll spend as much of his disposable income as his wife will let him get away with. Nice little chat going on over there. Yes, Wargamers Willpower. That's an oxymoron, isn't it? Let's have a look at some more pictures. I'll grab a bunch more here and get these open. Another swig of coffee. We're getting there, folks. We are getting there. But there's quite a few pictures I'd like to show you, and it's just taking a little while. So, there's the team. I'll zoom in again a bit there. On the left, Phil Ollie. Phil's looking a lot more trim these days. John Priest. Haven't seen John in ages, sadly. Me, doing a mad blink grin over the back. Stuart Asquith. Charles Grant. Steve Gill. Steve looking quite cool. A better picture with me not blinking, but flash. There we are. That's a very formal, good team photo. I think so. Look, there's Kelham Hall, stained glass windows. It's an amazing place, an amazing building. Let's move on. Right, down and dirty with the troops. So this is the Prussian left flank. There's that line of infantry with the guns. And here's, this Prussian cavalry. They've decided to send it off to the right fairly quickly to try and avoid that Austrian cavalry. Did it work for them? Now, we weren't following what happened in the original game. I have to tell you, we were just playing it as a game, just starting from that same starting point. But that's lovely. Look at that massive infantry, those big regiments. 48 infantry in one of Charles's the war game unit. So 48 rank and file. I think it's a colonel, 2 drummers and 2 lieutenants. So 5 supernumeraries. The cavalry, oh gosh, was it 24s, I think? Now, here's my cavalry. I call it mine because I was put in command of the Austrian cavalry because I love cavalry. And I thought, can I do what they didn't manage to do in the book? And here come my hurtling lancers, uhlans and hussars heading forward, supported by the heavies. Oh, I was enjoying this. And here in front of Groningen now, there's those infantry in position. Another look. This is a look at the heavy cavalry in support. At the back, the Lorraine heavy cavalry, the musketeers and all the others. A lovely top-down picture. That's a good one to show that sheer mass of infantry and artillery on the advance across the hills there. I think that's a cracking photo. And again, for those of us that had only seen the black and white pictures in the book, what are those green coats doing there? The blues are kind of like, all right, you sort of expected that. But green? None of us expected green. And these, is that Tutsi? the lady on horseback there, accompanied by an ADC. I think that's the Lady Tutsi. Beautiful tradition of London. What would it be? Was it a Staden figure? Beautiful. A bit blurry that one, but again, massive infantry. But we won't dwell on that one. Here we go. Back to Groningen and those infantry and the houses. Loved that. So let's move on to the next batch and clear those out the way. I think we've seen all of those. Oh, those ugly people. Let's get rid of those ugly people. I hope you're still enjoying this as a kind of the closest I can get. I'm sure there is a way that I could set up on Ecamm that I would select a bunch of pictures and it would do a slideshow, perhaps with a musical overlay. But I've not learnt how to do that yet. So you're getting this in a very kind of clunky way. But hopefully it is showing you how our game developed. Also, I must say, at the time, the number of people around the table was just extraordinary. The number of people coming up and saying, oh, I remember that, just like it had been with Sittangbad. And yes, we allowed some people to very carefully move some of the troops just so they could say, oh my God, I've touched some of the miniatures that were in the war game. And these are all Spencer Smiths, of course. There we are, back at Groningen. It's worth it for the close-up of these buildings. And you think, God, that's just so sketchy, but that's what they played with. Now, here, actually, it's worth it. If I zoom in a bit, you can see some of the damage happening where the miniature has actually been cast in this red plastic. And where the enamel paint's peeled off, you can see the red plastic underneath. That's one of the problems with... Because I don't think these were varnished either. I think they were just painted with enamels. I don't think they were varnished. They're certainly not gloss varnished. They were matte, as you can see. So, that's an interesting shot. Here we go. Graf von Grund. And, of course, Frederick the Great. Steve Gill having a think. I think there was a conflab going on with Stuart, John and Steve because they were commanding the VFS and they were trying to figure out what I was going to do and whether they were going to spring any surprises on us. Didn't work. Yes, there we are. Charles, Stuart, Steve and John having a bit of a conflab. That's a nice picture. One of the better lit overviews from the other side. Someone behind us, was it Old Glory? Yes. Had these, or someone putting on that game next to Old Glory, had these monstrously powerful arc lights. Another shot looking in the centre there. Was that Hemsden looking towards Groningen? That's a bit blurry. I've just dug out all the picture. Now, obviously, Stuart is giving some orders here. Steve might be going, eh? John is biting his lip, but Stuart appears to be in charge here, suggesting, I think you should do this. And it's probably to do with my cavalry here. But that's quite a nice shot. And an even better one to follow. I think Stuart's trying to give orders and Steve or John has queried it and Stuart's gone, well, I don't mind, it's up to you. Oh, dear, 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 dear. That's quite, I think that might be picture of the day, folks, that one of Stuart with John and Steve. And it's like, well, all right, it's up to you. Oh, dear, dear, dear. Like that. A picture on the other side of the table with the massed Lorenas preparing their defences to receive the nasty VFSs. So let's clear the board of those. Get a batch more. Oh, that's a good picture of Stuart and Steve and John. Oh, dear, dear, dear. Let's have a look at what we've got now. More coffee going into me. You all right, folks? Is everyone okay? Give me a thumbs up or something. Let me know that you're all right. That are you painting stuff while listening to this, watching this out the corner of your eye? You're obviously chatting about Wargamers budgeting or lack of it. Fantastic stuff. Right, some more pictures from the game. Oh, that's a nice one. Nice long line of Lorenas in front of the town of Groningen, and the VFSs, the Prussians, getting ever closer. Right at that tree line now. I obviously was taking a lot of photographs every move. That's what I was doing, because I was also thinking, I need some photographs for the magazine. And it's just as well I did take a lot because of the lighting conditions. Some of them are a bit blurry because, you know, I pressed the shutter and it's like, oh my God, it needs a second exposure or whatever because of the light. But that's not a bad one, with the VFSs coming closer. Steve and John having another conflab here. Brian's painting 10mm ACW. Oh, now that's made me feel guilty, Brian, because I've got shed loads of 10mm ACW of my own that I should be painting. Hi, Skeptical Crypto, thank you. Does all this make me want to do another? Oh dear. I think what I have to say is I couldn't possibly comment. Talk to me next year. After the lockdown. Of course, one of the problems we've got is that Charles Grant has sold off his collection of Spencer Smiths. He's replaced all his Spencer Smiths now with Krantara and Fife and Drum and Minden miniatures. So all his Spencer Smiths have gone. They've all gone. So I can't ever do this specific thing ever again, which is sad, isn't it? Yeah, I would say that I would call that probably quite a sad thing. Yeah, Paul. I mean, that's a moot point. I tell you what, folks. Don't go away. I'm going to go and get something. All right. I'm just going to leave my chair and walk to the other end of my loft and fetch something. Hang on a second. I'm back. Hello, folks. What I'm going to do just for a moment is go. No, that's not what I want, is it? I want to do not that. Okay. Where's the camera? Can you see this? This little video case contains a precious cargo given to me by Charles Stewart Grant. He did this not just for me, but for a few people who he knew were very attached to the war game. You see that? That's one of the original from his collection. There's another one. So these definitely date back to the 60s, and I daren't touch them by anything other than the base. So note on this one, the conversion, the addition of the Dragoon Muscatoon to the side of the figure, because that's not how the figure comes, and the plume on the tricorn as well. That's an addition that was made by his father, Charles Grant. It's an amazing thing. These are like holy relics. These were held, painted by Charles Grant. Got another one here, Grenadier, a Lorena. If I've gone a bit hushed at this moment, it's because it's quite emotional for a number of reasons. First of all, oh my God, I'm holding some figures right here that appeared in the war game, and that then I played with in the game that I'm describing to you today, and that now are scattered to the four winds. I mean, that's not that drastic. Some lucky person has bought them. I think they all went to one person. Here's another one. Another Dragoon with the addition of the musket. And the last one I've got is a Hussar. So it was very kind of Charles to think of me and a handful of other people who he also gifted little clutches of the original figures too. Extraordinary. They are, yes, as Brian said, absolute wargaming artifacts. Hugely jealous of whoever it was who bought the collection. I seem to recall that Charles said they might have gone abroad somewhere, as in, they're no longer in the UK. I hope they reach there in one piece, because knowing how fragile these little fellas are. But anyway, there you are. I thought you might like to see that as a thing. That's one of my most precious things, precious wargaming artifacts that I've got on my shelf over there. And obviously I keep them in the box because they're already brittle enough and I don't want to accelerate the process anymore. There you are. That was a little treat. Let's get back to some of these pictures. There's John and Steve doing some moves and, the game advancing from many angles. I obviously was fascinated by getting pictures of these mass battalions. Because there's the commanders. This one's a bit dark and blurry, so we'll skip past that one. That's dark and blurry, but you can see my cavalry coming for the guns. And the one thing he hasn't done, Steve and John didn't do, they didn't deploy that vital unit of infantry in line on the flank. Because what happened in the original book, you recall, the Austrian cavalry came screaming in to attack the guns, but this unit had deployed into line and done that kind of advance, part advance fire. They must have forgotten in the heat of the moment. Overlooked that. Let's get rid of those. So I wonder what happened. Are we going to get any indication of what happened? Here we go. Let's have a look at the next batch. Oh, well, I've got an in. Ha 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 ha! I think I know. Let's go here. So the crunch approaches. Now I remember this. Oh my goodness me! I remember this. Right. There's Steve looking calm as anything, looking out of the photo on the left. There's John thinking, oh, perhaps I ought to do something about all that cavalry approaching. And there he has picked up my canister cone and placed it over the top of my onrushing light cavalry, thinking, I'll make short work of these and absolutely muller them. Well, we'll come back to that. Lawrence, are you watching? Why have you got your finger up your nose? Chatting with Charles Grant. To be fair, it's not up his nose. He's looking pensive, rubbing his moustache, as those of us with facial hair often do. But here's just some of the people who are looking on at the game going, wow, I love this. And wow, are those really the real Spencer Smiths that were in the book? Yes, they are. I think lots of people were just utterly bemused about how that could happen. In passing, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to zoom in on this photo a bit because it's almost like incidental to the photo, but you notice what's happened here in the foreground? That's my light cavalry plunging into that line of infantry and guns. Did John's die rolling manage to stop me in my tracks? No, it did not. And moreover, I brought up light cavalry in support on the flank, who are also having a field day, the Lancers. So, unlike in the book, I feel like I was changing history. It was like, wow, my cavalry did a lot better than the original cavalry in the book because I wasn't stopped by canister. That line was not supported by infantry that blasted my flank. So, Henry the cavalry commander, I had a bit of fun. Tom, thanks for being with us. Bless you for staying as long as you have. I hope you've enjoyed it. You can always come back and watch the replay for the end later on. Okay? Cheers. So yes, there we are. I felt like I changed history. Not really history, but there we are. And there is another overview of that scene of carnage as my Lorraine cavalry carved into the VFS line with heavy cavalry coming up in support as well. Brag me never. Here's my Annie helping to move some troops. This is where we realised if we're going to get this game finished, we need help moving some of the troops. So there's my Annie helping to move my heavy cavalry reserve, and a splendid job she's doing too. Here's another close-up of this left wing. So what happened was, because the VFS had sent all their cavalry off to the right flank, you may remember, they did an about face when they realised, perhaps we shouldn't have done that with all our cavalry. So they decided to bring, and this is in fact the Hohenzollern Cuirassiere, I can tell from the photographs I took, the Hohenzollern Cuirassiere were brought back to try and stabilise the situation. Here's the hacking and slashing going on with my lancers against his hussars, and I seem to recall we were getting the better of it. Mass fighting going on, the infantry deploying. Because of this happening here, he's decided to start deploying some infantry into line to protect the centre whilst all these columns are still advancing. He's suddenly feeling a bit exposed. The Lady Tootsie perhaps ought to go somewhere else. Here we are. Charles Grant on the left talking to someone. I'm afraid I can't recognise who that is. Michael Perry. Phil Ollie. Steve Gill. That's Nick Elston, who's an archaeologist by trade. And Stuart Asquith. Looking, well, he's beaming actually, isn't he? He's so delighted to be part of this game, and he's really enjoying himself. That's a lovely thing to see. Okay. Ian's saying it's time to settle down for a binge read of the entire Battle Games collection. And Mike, you're welcome. This is me. I've lost weight since then. Thank goodness. Goodness me, I look like some sort of bulbous thing. Me and Steve discussing one of the finer points of the rules. I imagine. I don't quite know. Lovely guy, Steve. Now, I can tell you what happened. My hussars captured the colours of the Schaumburger Lippe infantry. Ta-da! That was my trophy from the game. The colours of the Schaumburg Lippe infantry of the VFS. Green coats. Who knew? So that was a glorious moment. You know, it was a demo game. We were showing, you know, it was a display/demo game. But we were also playing the game to try and show people how it worked. And we had a huge amount of fun. And it was a glorious moment for me because, hey, my hussars captured the colours. Absolutely loved it. So let me get rid of those. We're coming to the close, ladies and gentlemen. So thanks for sticking with me. Got 2 or 3 more batches to go. I'll get through them as swiftly as I can. Meanwhile, drinking even more coffee. It's the last of me coffee, but I have got another hot drink to show. Right, let me just check. I've got the right one. Yeah, okay, so this is a bit blurry with the people because they were moving in the bad light, but there's Stuart having a chat over the back. Loads of people going, sorry, are you Stuart Asquith? And Stuart looking down at his badge and pointing and going, yes, apparently. And it's like, oh my God, because it's the first time Stuart had been seen in public for a decade or more. You can see the action developing here. The Lorrainers are doing all right, but there's that massive VFS soldiery starting to deploy into line. And this lead unit at the foot of the hill, it's getting tense. It's getting tense. But my cavalry on the right, they're doing okay. A look along the line from the Lorrainers side, from the Lorrainers' right flank. And you can see this, imminent crunch approaching. Meanwhile, on the other side, my hussars having a field day hacking their way through the infantry, and meanwhile this cavalry melee between their hussars and my lancers carrying on, because there was melees could carry on for 2 or 3 turns or something in the grant rules before the cavalry then had to retire to sort of refresh themselves. But yes, his infantry not getting the best of it. His gun's getting hacked to pieces as well, unable to fire because I'm in amongst the gunners. I loved it. And here's that other cavalry melee with the lancers and the hussars. On and on it goes. Now you see my hussars have crept round the flank of the infantry, so they've impacted the front, destroyed so many and reduced that infantry unit so much I'm folding it up from the flank. And this unit's just standing here, useless, doing nothing. I couldn't possibly comment. I wasn't commanding that side. I was just having fun on the other side. Now we can see Hohenzollern and Cuirassier are deciding perhaps it's time we intervened in that cavalry melee, so they're starting to come forward. And here from the side now, well, there you go. That infantry unit has been reduced almost to half. I mean, both sides again are getting close to 50%, I would say, but it's, considering I'm just light cavalry, I was so happy, and his gunners getting hacked to pieces as well. Meanwhile, his right flank, however, is looking much more powerful as it approaches the town, and he's managed to get a battery unlimbered in the centre here, which is, whoa, nasty, nasty. Big guns, don't like those. I'm not sure what this is showing. This is showing not a great deal. Let's skip that one, folks. Here we are, looking from the other VFS flank, where you can see these columns of infantry, and these, more importantly, these units now that are deploying into line because they're starting to feel threatened by all this other stuff. You know, it was supposed to be the VFS doing all the attacking, but they're starting to look a bit defensive, don't you think? I couldn't possibly comment. Here's more of those wonderful VFS units. Can I identify any of them? Who's this with the orange corners? Oh, that's the Löwenstein Earls Grenadiers. And this one here with the green, the heart in the centre, that's the Pfalz Sonderheim Infantry. And behind them with that lovely looking flag, who's that? That's the Kneiphausen Grenadiers. If you've read the war game, these are very, these resonate, these names, don't they? Over there with the stripy flag, that's the Butruski Infantry. And, well, we've already discussed the unit I've mullered. So, there we go. Action all happening, but it's all happening in the wrong place. The VFS are stunned, rocked back on their heels because the Lorrainers are supposed to be the ones running away, but I wasn't having any of that. No, I wasn't just going to do a walkthrough of what had happened in the book. It's like, hey, it's a game, guys, we're playing this and we're having fun. And it was. I mean, the reaction we were getting from the people coming past was wonderful. A slightly blurry look, but what you can see here, coming into shot here in the corner, who's that? That's the Sobieski Infantry, just reaching the first contour, and of course it's half speed when you cross the contour in the Grant rules. So obviously they've got this problem that all horse and musket wargamers have, is how long do I stay in column before deploying into line, and do I use up my first volley just to feel better, or do I wait and stay disciplined? But look at all these Lorrainers in line. Hey, we're here, ready and waiting for you. Here's the follow-up units behind Sobieski. Not making as much rapid progress as they would help. Here's a nice little look. There we are, there's the Lorrainers and the buildings. Hello, we're waiting for you. And that's one with slightly better light, but still blurry. Here is... yes, this is Commanders. Just showing some of the Staden figures. They're lovely figures. Right, this is quite a nice oblique shot, because now on the right flank, you can see... Oh, is that VFS infantry running away? Is that my light cavalry hacking his limber riders to pieces now? Is that his light cavalry running away? Now, what it is that's exactly as I've described. You can see over here, my lancers and his hussars have exhausted each other in melee, and so both have now got orders to fall back, to recover. It probably looks like they've hit half strength as well, which means that they're going to head home, but in a disciplined, civilised way. So now you can see the VFS have brought not one, but 2 units of heavy cavalry back to this flank, because they've realised that with all the damage I've done, the way is clear for my heavy cavalry to just make merry on their left flank. Memories. It's lovely. Meanwhile, near Groningen, more troops moving up in reserve with the VFS. You can see Sobieski just starting. Sobieski just starting to come up the hill there. And no doubt they were holding their breath. And I think we were holding our breath to deliver our first volley at close range and just blast the head off those columns. So lots of activity. But, you know, we weren't feeling that under pressure on the Lorraine side. Here we are, another view from the other side. There we are. Yes, the Sobieski just coming up the hill. And I'm not sure which Lorraine regiment that was. But they're just like, yeah, come on, bring it on. Kablam. And another view from the right flank of the VFS units. Who's this in the foreground there with that funky flag? This is the Liv Garden infantry, yes, which we saw earlier when they were in column on the other side of the trees. But they've obviously had to take some time to get through the foliage. But there's a line forming and approaching the crunch. Let's get rid of those. Nearly there, folks. Nearly there. I reckon I've just got 2 batches. Yeah, I reckon 2 batches will do it. So, thanks for sticking with me, folks. You're great people, and you've been with me quite a while now. Hi, Paul. Glad you like my enthusiasm. Can you tell my voice is starting to get croaky? And Brian, yes, it is the war game. Check back to earlier. It is the war game. Paul, it's the war game. Which do I prefer? Which do I prefer? Oh, for me it's the war game simply because that's what I imprinted on. But having also played the charge rules once or twice at John Priest's house, I was actually impressed. Both times we played obviously the charge rules for Sittangbad, but John Priest is a Napoleonics nut, and so we actually played a couple of Napoleonic games at his place. The rules worked really well. I was very surprised. They're much more precise, as I said, than the war game rules. There are a few areas where I wish that Peter Young had done for Charge the same as Charles Stewart Grant ended up doing for the war game, and producing a book, like this. The Charge Companion would have been really helpful, because there are some areas where it's like, oh, I wish he was still around to ask him exactly what he meant by that. So that's a really interesting question. The war game rules, having done the play sheet and everything, I know that I know them pretty much inside out. And because of the things like because this is the other thing. Charge doesn't have bounce sticks. Charge doesn't have canister cones. It's a surprisingly different beast. I think people think they're the same, but they are not. I think because of the fun aspect, because of the gizmos, I think the war game just has it for me, and because it's the one I've got the most affection for. But if I was attempting a more serious game, actually, Charge would probably be worth, definitely would get a look in. But it's also because of my experiences with both rule sets and others that I ended up writing my own Shot, Steel and Stone, Paul. That's why I ended up writing my own set of rules, like all of us eventually, or many of us eventually think, do you know what, none of these rule sets quite matches what I actually want from a war game set in this era. So do you know what, I'm going to try writing a set of my own. And so if you like, in my own shot, steel and stone rules, there is definitely, I acknowledge massively the heritage of the war game, of Charge, but also things like War Master and Black Powder and Bruce Quarry's Napoleonics rules and many others. There is definitely DNA in there from many of those. And, God, I'm not saying my own shot, steel and stone rules are perfect, but they give me the kind of game that I want to play in this era, with what I'd like to think is a lot of the fun aspects of the war game. And also because I'm me and mad, I also have made bounce sticks for shot, steel and stone. You don't have to, you can just use a tape measure, but I rather like having range sticks and bounce sticks and that kind of stuff, and so I've made them. And so when the rules have been used for the big Ayton games and stuff, I made a whole clutch of bounce sticks that were passing up and down the table on either side, and it's fun. It just reinforces that these rules are supposed to be fun, right? It just brings back some of the charm of that era and the war game and so forth. But as I say, I think Phil Ollie and John Priest, they would say Charge. I think me and Steve Gill would say the war game. And it really does. You're split down the middle, aren't you? Which was the first one you picked up? How old were you when you picked it up? Because some people who, never played these sort of games and come to them much later go, oh my God, oh, that's so imprecise, or, that's, oh, no multiple basing, blah, 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 blah. People coming late to this might think, I hate that. Oh God, I can't stand that. And the thought of moving all those figures. Well, the fact is, like in the war game, Charles persisted in single basing. You could have done multiple figure basing. You could have done it like Bruce Quarry did in his Napoleonic rules, where you base things up as, some as sixes, some as fours, some as threes, twos, ones, whatever, so you can take off your individuals. But to speed up movement, or you could use sabots or something, or trays, movement trays, would be really easy to do, at the cost of the look of the thing, because I bang on about this so often. There is a certain aesthetic to games like this. If I zoom in on this photo, right, there's a certain aesthetic to all those singly based figures that's it's one of those things. And also, as Charles Grant would point out, his melee rules were very much man against man. There's a whole section now. Where can I find? Is it in the diagrams I did? Let me see if I can find a diagram. Did I do this for the... I did. If I hold that up, can you see? There's a diagram at the bottom of the page there. There you go. Where in the book he goes into some detail about, a melee, like a column attacking a line. It's like a pat of butter squishing up against the side of a piece of bread or something. I can't remember the exact analogy was, but the way that the figures moved out from the centre to the sides and squished up against the opposition. And individual basing permits that visually in a way that, of course, multiple basing doesn't. So if you wanted to be a purist about the war games rules, you say, well, it has to be individual basing. But actually, there are other ways that you can overcome that, other options you can come up with to deal with that kind of thing. But, you pays your money and takes your choices. Anyway, who was this unit that's in the middle of the picture there? I ought to, give them a credit and tell you that is a unit that... Oh, that's the unit whose flag isn't in the war. Oh, no, it is. Here we go. Löwenstein Earls Grenadiers, folks. That's who that is. Another look from the line as Sobieski infantry are about to get blasted away. Obviously, we were taking some time about Mulling them. Here's my heavy cavalry reserve galloping forward. That's why they're blurred. It's not because my camera shook in the darkness of Kelham Hall. It's because they're moving, chaps. All those. I love that dragoon pose. That charging dragoon. It's so iconic. Here we go. The crowding now. As the VFS infantry is bypassing their battery. All their units are getting clobbered in the background there. That's blurred at the moment. Here it are from the other flank. And you can see my hussars are still hanging around. I obviously hadn't reached half strength whilst the infantry had run away. And I'm now thinking, wow, what shall I do with them now? Who shall I attack next? Options, choices. Yes, there's those nasty grenadiers on the ridge there. Are they going to shoot at me? Am I bothered? Shall I just, yay, let's get stuck in again? I can't remember. There's the Sobieski infantry still on that ridgeline. We obviously haven't shot at them yet. Let's go to the next one. What's happening here? There's the pandemonium on the VFS left centre. And it truly is pandemonium. Because obviously there's this unit. Oh, I've been chewing up that unit as well. So I've killed not one, but 2 units of infantry and a battery of artillery. I'm not going to gloat, but hey. And there's, oh yes, the grenadiers have moved down from the ridge to threaten me. Bit blurry. And Sobieski infantry again. Right, well, I think we're coming up to our last batch of things. I think we were coming to the end of the day at Partizan. And so the game was kind of slowing down a bit. I think we were all basically pretty knackered, frankly. So let's open this last batch from Mollwitz. So you haven't got long to put up with me, folks. I'm nearly there. A shot from behind those troops advancing through the woods. There must have been a volley delivered at some point. I can't believe they're still standing there. We're just glowering at one another. Maybe because I wasn't involved in the action on that part of the table. Maybe they just decided, you know what, you're not going any further, Gov, and I'm just going to save you the disgrace of actually having the head of your column blown off. But look at this beautiful line that the Lorrainers of the Austrians, Lorrainers have managed to form. There's more wild geese, Irish, Dylan or Batriska, whoever is, coming through the woods in support into the village. I think that Groningen's looking pretty safe, particularly given what's happening on the far side of the table. Don't you reckon? All this support coming up. We've got battery deployed. Yeah, those Prussians are going nowhere. There's Frederick and the Graf von Grunt probably saying, do you know what? I think we might call it a day. And there's still Sobieski at the front. How are they still standing? There's obviously a truce has been declared on that ridgeline, hasn't it? And that was, yeah, that's just another random picture. So that, folks, is all the photos from Mollwitz that I took on the day. Some of them are a bit blurry, sorry about that. But that's not actually the last one I want to finish on, because I want to take this opportunity to once again to remember this man, Stuart Asquith, who sadly left us, and it should be remembered, you know, that one of the things that I'm happiest about is that, well, 2 things really. Stuart was able to contribute to my magazine, that I was able to bring him back into the wargaming fold, really, after he'd been so badly treated by Nexus Publications when they closed down in very quick succession Practical Wargamer and then Regiment magazines, basically leaving him, you know, out of the hobby as a writer. And that's what prompted him to move away to the Cotswolds. So there was that, being able to, you know, let him have a run doing a column and some reviews and stuff for Battle Games magazine. He wasn't always an easy chap to work with, and in the end had to part company because of a disagreement over something that he was doing for me. But that's life, it's part of the goes with the territory. But I'm really grateful for the time he was contributing to the magazine, and I know that he was delighted to be able to do so. And secondly, the fact that we were able to get him and his mate Charles, because they were best mates, involved in the recreation of Mollwitz from the war game, which was iconic in so many ways, but also you could just tell on the day meant so much to him and to Charles, because it's also something that they were able to do together for the first time in ages. And it meant so much to so many of the people who came to see the game on the day. So thanks to Stuart. Rest in peace. Thanks also to Charles, who's still with us, thank goodness, Charles Stuart Grant, for that amazing gesture of loaning us all those amazing Spencer Smiths, original Spencer Smiths, that have now, headed off to someone else's collection. But it was one of those once-in-a-lifetime opportunities that will never come again. And so I count myself as extremely fortunate to have been able to take part and help organise that. So, folks, thank you so much for sticking with me. We've been going for... How long have we been going? I've lost track. Quite a long time. So I hope you managed to get lots of miniatures painted and lots done, and that you've enjoyed this journey through the organisation and staging of the two games of Sittangbad and Mollwitz, and that you found something of interest along the way. Perhaps some of you seeing stuff about these books and battles for the first time. Some of you maybe not, just rekindling some old memories. But thanks hugely for watching. And as I said, I'm going to all the PDF stuff that I produced that's going to be potentially useful, the reading material, force lists, that kind of stuff, I'm going to post on the Battle Games website, and I will post those links later today and announce them via the Partizan in the Cloud website and on my Twitter at Battle Games feed, and via the Battle Games Facebook page and anywhere else I can think of. All right, and there'll be free downloads. You can just get hold of them, and who knows, maybe you'll end up restaging Sittangbad or Mollwitz yourself. Thanks ever so much, folks, for watching. Take care, stay safe in the current environment, and I'll see you around soon. Bye.